So I had a chance to observe these three generations of people. The first generation, living on rice primarily and vegetables, very little meat, no dairy, were always trim. They had no breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, no diabetes, no heart disease, active into their 80s and 90s. Their kids, who gave up some of this starch and vegetable eating, went into more of the animal products, more of the rich foods. They got a little fatter, a little sicker, and the grandkids were just as fat and just as sick as anybody that I had ever taken care of. So that was my introduction. That taught me that what I'd originally learned as an unhealthy diet, a diet without meat and dairy, was not true, because my healthiest people did not eat diets centered on meat and dairy. They ate diets centered on starch. And it also taught me that it wasn't inevitable that as you get older, you get fatter and sicker, because these people didn't. They maintained their good health and their activity into old age. It was because of their diet.
Hey, welcome folks. We are live again. I opened with that clip of Dr. John McDougall, who is of course one of the pioneers of plant-based nutrition. He was way ahead of his time. And he was seeing firsthand in his life, if you know his story, how a traditional starch-based diet kept people lean and disease-free, with the modern American diet making people sick. So McDougall knew what worked. He never backed down from the truth. And today we've got another doctor who cuts through the noise and focuses on real science, Dr. Peter Rogers. He is here for Q&A. Yeah, welcome, Peter. And he's going to take your questions. We got a lot of them. Some people posted them on a video that I put up a couple of days ago, and then some were emailed to me ahead of time. If you subscribe to my Substack, you will learn whenever a new video is going up, and you'll be able to email me from there questions. So I think there's a link down below to click over and follow me on Substack. So we will get through as many questions as we can today. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Peter Rogers is an absolute powerhouse in the world of health and nutrition. He studied at some of the most prestigious institutions in the world, at Stanford, Northwestern, Harvard Medical School, where he built a foundation in science and medicine that just very few people can match. And when it came time for his board exams, he scored in the 99th percentile. You literally cannot score any higher than that. Dr. Rogers has practiced medicine for many years. He's authored multiple books, applying his sharp analytical mind to cutting through misinformation, helping people optimize their health. His relentless dedication to science, his ability to break down complex topics, and his no-nonsense approach have made him a very trusted voice in the plant-based community. Simply put, he's a genius, and we're very lucky to have him here today. Peter, we're very lucky. Thanks for joining us. We got a lot to cover. Maybe we should just jump right in. We got a lot of questions. You ready?
Yeah.
Let's do it. So, all right, here's the first question. Despite being very thin and back on a very low-fat diet, I'm struggling to get my blood sugar down to where I want it. I'm also active and not sudden theory. It's very frustrating when others respond so easily to cutting the fat out of their diet, but I don't. What else can I do?
Well, you can, first of all, minimize dietary fat, because that'll minimize insulin resistance, and that'll help you to control your blood glucose level. But there's other things that contribute to insulin resistance that promote diabetes. If you're stressed out, that raises cortisol and catecholamines. The same hormones are elevated by caffeine, coffee and tea. And those will also raise your blood glucose level. Sleep deprivation does the same thing. So you want to try to minimize those. Excessive dietary sodium contributes a little bit to having elevated blood sugars. There's other things that can cause diabetes. Excessive amount of fried foods. You don't ever want to eat fried foods. I think that's why so many people that eat an Indian diet have diabetes. And there's other things less commonly known, but they're toxic to the pancreatic beta cells. Aluminum, for example, okay? So you really want to filter your water. I think it's good to have a whole house carbon filter, but you want to have a reverse osmosis filter in your kitchen, for example, the water you drink, the water you cook with. Those are things that can also minimize your incidence of insulin resistance. In addition, you want to watch out for SERCA inhibitors. SERCA inhibitors, that means sarcoplasm, endoplasmic reticulum, calcium ATPase. Okay, you just throw the sarcoplasm on, that comes from skeletal muscle. But what I'm getting at is anything that causes you, that smells bad, usually is a SERCA inhibitor. So, inhaling paint, factory fumes, a lot of these things, dry cleaning chemicals, you want to avoid all those things because they're often SERCA inhibitors. Okay. The next question is you should ask yourself, well, why do people get insulin resistance? And the main mechanism is saturated fat causing inhibition like of complex 3 in between coenzyme Q complex 3 in the intermitochondrial membrane electron transport chain. So what I'm saying is, I think it would be wise to try to avoid anything else that's inhibiting the mitochondria. You'll notice that some medications like statins, for example, they're inhibitors of intermitochondrial membrane electron transport. So avoiding those types of medications might also help you to have more insulin sensitivity. Anything that interferes with that intermitochondrial membrane electron transport could worsen insulin resistance. And there's a lot of things that do it. You'd be amazed. I went through all my biochemistry books and I couldn't find anything from my college and med school biochem books. But then I started going through the paper because I knew there had to be more of them. And I found tons of them. There's tons of medications. And tell me if you think these are familiar. Tylenol, metformin for diabetes, okay, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for depression, tricyclic antidepressants, like amitriptyline, for example, a lot of antibiotics, aminoglycosides, beta-lactams, fluoroquinolones, all these things are intermitochondrial membrane inhibitors. Bisphenol A, the hard plastic that's used like a glass. Even some of the non-stick cookware can give off POFAs that are related to intermitochondrial membrane inhibition. Okay. So I would kind of go through that list and I would avoid all of them and see if that helps. If you're still not getting things under control as well as you like, the older we get, the more fragile we get. So the more careful we have to be about our health by avoiding all the bad things and, doing all the good things. Get our exercise, get our sleep.
Beautiful. All right. Next question. Can Dr. Rogers comment on RFK Jr.'s stance on the use of vitamins as opposed to time-tested measles vaccine? You know what? I don't think I want to talk about this stuff on my channel. Sorry. I mean, you can get penalized if you say the wrong thing on that subject. Dr. Peters recently mentioned beet juice as healthy. Can he share his source?
There's a lot of different beet juices out there. Probably the one that I think is best is called Biota. And the reason I mention that is it has the highest ratio that I've seen of potassium relative to sodium. There's a guy by the name of Richard Moore. He wrote the best book ever written on hypertension. It's called High Blood Pressure Solution. Richard Moore was an MD PhD. He devoted his entire life to studying hypertension, in particular the plasma membrane ion pumps. Okay, and so what he talked about was the higher your amount of potassium relative to your sodium, the less likely you are to have a hypertension. He called it the K factor. Okay, the K factor is the ratio of potassium to sodium. You also need magnesium, but magnesium is located in the center of chlorophyll. So if you just eat plant foods, you're going to get more magnesium. Okay, so what I'm basically saying is I want a very high ratio. I think our ancestors probably ate in the ballpark about 20 times more potassium than sodium. Dennis Burkitt had joked that humans are the only animal that eats more sodium than potassium. And that's because they get so much sodium from the processed foods and they add it as a flavorant and it's used as a preservative with meats, for example. Okay, so what I'm saying is the reason I like Biota is very high potassium to sodium ratio. The other beet juices tended to have a lot more added sodium, which I didn't like. And I find it good for exercise. They've shown on stationary bikes, you put a bicycle racer and they have increased endurance, increased exercise capacity. I know it's true because I've done it a lot with high repetition squats. And when I guzzle down 32 ounces of beet juice, I chase it with 12 ounces of water. And then I wait an hour and a half to 2 hours later, and I got a lot more energy for running upstairs, 20 flights of stairs, or for doing high repetition squats. And when I give talks, I know too, the words come faster, especially for a long talk. If it's going to be like a 2-hour talk or something, they just do. So.
Great. All right. My questions for Dr. Rogers. What can I do for primary asymptomatic hyperthyroidism? TSH fluctuates between 7 to 13. It's not antibody and cortisol based to avoid medication as endocrinologists want me to take. And 1.1 question, is there a correlation between thyroid and lipid profile? It seems that when cholesterol rises, TSH rises, and when cholesterol rises related to more fat in the diet. I'm eating 100% whole unprocessed, SOS-free, low-fat plant foods, that's the McDougall, but have a tendency to overeat, train every day, strength, function, movement, and cardio?
Well, I would try to find out why you have hypothyroidism. Most common causes are things like autoimmune diseases like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and then post-treatment effects. If you had surgery for a thyroid nodule, if you had ablation for Graves' disease, thyrotoxicosis. Because if you know what's causing it, you maybe could avoid that thing. When you start talking about unknown cause and borderline hypothyroidism, then you run into what I would call the optimal health paradigm. What I mean by that is if we just optimize our overall health, sometimes the body sort of heals itself and gets us over the edge to where we can do well. And Neil Bernard had written a lot about this. He wrote a good book called Your Body in Balance about hormones. And some of these patients, just when they optimize their diet, they would improve their thyroid function enough to not need medications. What I would then do is I would look up all the foods that are goitrogenic. For example, soy has a tendency to be goitrogenic. There's other foods, the cauliflower, the cruciferous vegetables, cruciferous based on the shape of their leaves. Those tend to be goitrogenic. I would avoid all of those things. Even flax can be a little bit goitrogenic. So I would look up that list and I would avoid all those things and see if you can just get yourself over the edge. And maybe that would help.
Great. Why is my cholesterol still relatively high after 12 years on a whole food plant-based diet? My total is 170, LDL 120, 63 years old, strict SOS free, no fat, and so on. It's not heredity. Could it be stress? If you don't have an answer ready now, could you please try and make a separate video? Okay.
Well, yeah. First of all, some people, it's harder for them to get their total cholesterol down. And I've heard both Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. Ornish say, if the person closely follows the diet, they'll be healthy. They're unlikely to have a cardiovascular event, even if their total cholesterol doesn't come down as low as they would hope, let's say below 150. But it's also been my personal experience. Most of the people, the person said they were following the diet. I don't know if they were definitely following as low a fat version as they could. You could try reducing your dietary fat even more. For example, rice, white rice is only 1% of calories from fat. Same thing with potatoes and sweet potatoes, only 1% of calories from fat. Lentils have the lowest percentage of calories from fat amongst the beans. Like lentils are only 3% of calories from fat. Black beans are about 4%. So that could be advantageous for you. For example, if you look at garbanzo beans, those are about 13% of calories from fat. Oatmeal, somewhere in the ballpark of around 15% of calories from fat. So you can see if further reducing your fat, for example, in that sense, might make a difference. And also controlling your sleep. Psychological stress, sleep deprivation, caffeine, all of those things increase blood lipids.
Right.
Oh, one last thing too. I'm sorry, one last thing. Is you want to maybe eat more fiber. Dietary fiber helps to lower blood cholesterol. So if you elevate your dietary fiber intake, Dennis Burkitt thought we were sort of designed to probably eat about 100 grams per day. Average American's only eating 5 to 10 per day. And McDougall said, you should probably try to get at least about 50 grams a day. So what I'm saying is the more fiber you eat, that'll have a tendency to clear cholesterol out of your blood. And the high fiber also, it produces the good bacteria in the gut because it feeds the good bacteria, if you will. And when you feed the good bacteria in the gut, you get less of the bad bacteria. Bad bacteria, one of the things they have is they're characterized by increased glucuronidase enzyme. The body excretes estrogen through the liver into the bile, and then we defecate it out of our body. But if you have the so-called bad bacteria due to a lack of dietary fiber, they deconjugate it, and then you reabsorb more estrogen, which is a fat storage hormone, and that predisposes towards obesity and hyperlipidemia. Also, by optimizing body weight, I don't know if yours is optimal or not yet, that also decreases the incidence of hyperlipidemia.
Great. Is grilled skinless chicken breast bad for you once a week?
I recommend to be 100% vegan. I recommend do not eat any animal foods at all. Just because, T. Colin Campbell wrote in his book, there is no safe minimal amount at which you don't increase your risk of cancer. All animal foods intrinsically have problems. They're all high in saturated fat. They're all, contain a lot of animal protein, and animal protein does a lot of things you don't like. It's acidotic because it's got more methionine in particular that gets metabolized as sulfuric acid. And then that causes buffering of the pH by pulling calcium out of the bones and out of the muscles, excreted in the kidneys. You get calciuria. That increases your risk of kidney failure eventually because it can precipitate, cause kidney stones, and cause tubular obstructions. It increases the risk of osteoporosis. It increases the risk of chronic kidney disease. It's associated with increased risk of cancer. So I think it's best to just not eat any animal foods.
If on travel, what are some good restaurant options? Baked potato at Wendy's, veggie salad at Subway?
Uh, yeah, it's a more complex question than one would think. Theoretically, a baked potato is not that bad. I wonder what else they put in it, if they put anything else into it, which they might. The veggie sandwich, maybe they're better now at Subways than they used to be. Subways, it was a long time ago. It was about 25 years ago, but they had some problem with an additive in their bread that was thought to be rather toxic. Increased people being sleepy. I don't remember the exact details of it, but theoretically Subway would be great, all these plant foods, but I doubt they're the highest quality plant foods. I doubt they're organic.
I like to stop at a Whole Foods and go hit their salad bar or something like that myself when I'm traveling. That's my go-to spot. Okay, I have a wicked case of eczema that just got 2 years ago. At age 70, blood work showed a massive amount of oxalates found in all plant foods. How would you suggest I go about healing this while eating plant foods? For what it's worth, I'm otherwise pretty healthy for 72. I know I have some messed up inside me. I was way overweight for about 5 years from age 64, 69, but now pretty good weight, but still have the eczema.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going to help your eczema, but again, when in doubt, Dr. McDougall once said, if a person told me they had excessive earwax, I would tell them to eat, the whole food, low-fat, plant-based vegan diet. It sort of just improves blood flow to all of your body, so you have more of a tendency to heal. The other thing that it does is it helps prevent leaky gut, so you can avoid the autoimmune diseases, which are sometimes associated with skin manifestations. The other thing I would do is I'd start looking at what chemicals is your skin exposed to. Some people have skin rashes because of the type of soap they use. You can get one of those transparent, hypoallergenic soaps. Some people due to the laundry detergents they're using. So I would try to minimize all of that stuff, see if that helps.
Great. My eGFR has progressively declined over the past year. A year ago was 92, then 6 months at age 90. 6 months ago, 90, then last week, 89. I'm concerned. Starting eating black beans with my white rice about 8 months ago due to a rise in triglycerides, and they lower that measurement. But now this. I've been eating black beans with white rice as often as 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes more. Might this be causing the eGFR decline?
Okay, but I don't know if this is a joke. Okay, a GFR, a 92 is great, and 90 is like an insignificant change in 89. That's statistical noise. I don't know if this is a joke, okay? When you really talk about GFR declines, what really matters is when you drop below 60. That's when they define you as having kidney disease. And it is true that a person really should get their act together when they drop to a GFR. That means glomerular filtration rate, the ability of the kidney to filter the blood. And when they really got to watch out is if they get below 30, okay, that's when you're stage 4 kidney disease. You go on dialysis typically when your GFR drops to about 7. And the reason I mention this is most nephrologists, like typical medical doctors, they're not educated in nutrition, so they're not even aware of the studies in their own field. And what I'm talking about is the main job the kidney does is it excretes nitrogen. And so if you minimize dietary nitrogen, you minimize the workload of the kidney. That's about 75% of the workload of the kidney. And Dr. Kempner figured out a lot of this stuff back in the 1940s because he was taking care of kidney patients when there was no dialysis available. Okay, so first of all, minimize the amount of protein they eat. There's only nitrogen in protein. There's no nitrogen in fat. There's no nitrogen in carbohydrate. And if you look at like RDA recommendations, they're going to say people should eat at least 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram per day. Okay, but that's really far more than we need. Okay, you can drop it down easily to what's called a low protein diet, 0.6 grams per kilogram per day. And you don't need to supplement anything, and that's very easy to do. And I actually still think that's kind of high. Then the next step is to drop down to a very low protein diet, which is 0.3 grams per kilogram per day. There's a very good book about this. First of all, there's 2 good books. I recommend Plant-Fed Kidneys by Jennifer Moore. She's a registered dietitian she has a lot of lectures on YouTube about protecting your kidneys. And she wrote a very good book called Plant-Fed Kidneys. It's real easy. Plant-Fed Kidneys for the practitioner. You could read that in a weekend, okay? And then if you want more information, there's a guy by the name of Lee Hull, and he himself had focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, and he basically cured himself by eating a very strict diet. He made a good comment. He said, I noticed by studying the Esselstyn diet and a few other diets and McDougall and whatnot that the persons who were the most extreme about restricting their dietary amounts of protein and fat and stuff, they had the best outcomes, okay? So what I'm trying to say is the goal is to figure out how can you tighten it up and still enjoy what you eat, be healthy and happy. But a very low protein diet. Once you get very low in protein, you'll sometimes have to supplement with essential amino acids or with keto analogs, which is the amino acid with the nitrogen removed. When the person ingests that inside their body, the nitrogen is added back to it. And it's a way to get the effect of having the essential amino acids without having to ingest the protein itself, and thus not increase your overall nitrogen burden. All right, but another thing is, if you look at the difference between plant and animal foods, it's really true that other than the lack of B12, everything good is in plant foods, everything bad is in animal foods and processed foods. The animal foods got the animal protein, which causes a lot of inflammation, which causes the metabolic acidosis, puts a big burden on the kidney. As a matter of fact, whenever you eat animal protein, you go into something called hyperfiltration, whereby you constrict what's called the efferent arteriole, the E for efferent, E for exciting arteriole of the glomerulus. And that causes intraglomerular hypertension. The glomerulus is the nephron. It's the filtration unit of the kidney. So basically, you're pumping high pressure blood into this delicate thing because of the animal protein ingestion that you've just made. So it's best to just not do that at all, and you avoid intraglomerular hypertension. So you slow down the rate of kidney failure. It's like making the human body work triple shifts. You don't want to do that. Once in a while is okay, but you don't want to do that on a daily basis. There's also more bioavailable phosphates in animal foods and processed foods. They're bad for the kidney. The lack of dietary fiber with processed foods and animal foods leads to the production of gut toxins. And that's things like indoxyl sulfate, indole acetic acid, trimethylamine oxide, and also p-cresyl sulfate. All of those things are nephrotoxic and cardiovascular toxins that increase thrombosis, atherosclerosis. So basically what I'm saying is, when you eat the plant-based diet, you get all the good stuff. You get the vasodilators, the potassium, the magnesium. You get the plant nitrates that are precursors to endothelial nitric oxide, all the good stuff. And you get the fiber, which prevents leaky gut and all those autoimmune diseases and, prothrombotic problems like amyloid clotting. So that's what you should do.
Beautiful. I am going to go over here to, what do I have to remove something here? Okay, now we're on the video questions that people ask. We just start at the bottom. That's the earliest one. Why do people get lots of filled cysts all over their bodies?
Now, I don't quite know what lots of cysts all over their body really mean.
Yeah.
You can get like a dermatology disease, something like bullous pemphigoid or something. So that's really sort of a dermatology question. I do know some people are predisposed just to having sebaceous cysts around their head and their neck. Nobody quite knows why. For cosmetic regions, they can surgically remove those. I got a tiny little one by my ear that I've had forever. I don't even think about it. I don't even notice it. But yeah, that's the best I can tell you on that.
Okay, the next one says, anytime I take B12, I get acne breakouts. Even though I've eaten McDougall for years, I'm in my 40s, would B vitamin injections get around the side effect?
Well, what I would do is I look at the type of B supplement that you're taking. A lot of times there's multiple attitudes to them. I've seen some of them with over like 10 ingredients. For example, I wouldn't want stevia. Stevia's got some significant side effects, not to mention a lack of, fertility. Okay, so I wouldn't eat that. The one I recommend using is the simplest possible B12 supplement. I like methylcobalamin supplements. I like the ones that are absorbed sublingual with the fewest possible ingredients, because that way you avoid all the issues of the gut. And by having the fewest ingredients, you're least likely to react to one of the side effects. I would never take cyano. You know what cyano is, don't you? That's an intermitochondrial membrane inhibitor, which theoretically, it's such a small amount, and the body can theoretically detoxify, like excrete it in the urine as a thiocyanate. But why eat any of that at all? Okay? That's another reason why I'm not a fan of eating flax, and I'm not a fan of eating almonds. They all contain a little bit of cyanide, okay? I don't want any of that in my body. I don't want to take a risk that might accumulate at all. Even though supposedly it's a small amount and we can detoxify it, why ingest that at all? Okay, so anyways, that's what I would say. I would eat methylcobalamin and sublingual with the fewest ingredients, and see if you don't have side effects related to that.
All right. Here we go. Next is what's the big deal with castor oil? Is it a fad? I thought oils can penetrate skin in the first place, or can't.
I don't have any experience with castor oil. I'm not sure why people are rubbing that on their skin. And it kind of reminds me of the Rodney Dangerfield statement. There's a fine line between rubbing lotion on yourself and rubbing yourself with lotion. So I don't know where that's going, but I have no experience with castor oil on the skin.
All right. Next question is, I was hoping you can do an in-depth talk on why there are zero health benefits in chicken, eggs, meat, dairy, etc. Maybe a quick comment now and a video later. I'm badgered about this by family. Want to know how to put it to bed, especially concerning my kids. Everyone has an opinion.
Okay, there's an old joke like in a legal case when one side doesn't have any good arguments or evidence. What they do is they use ad hominem and they sort of stir up emotional stuff. And what I'm trying to say is paleo keto carnivore is always trying to stir up emotions because they have no data to support that type of diet. You know, other than a refractory seizure patient, you know, not responding to medications, there's about nothing that would make me want to do the paleo keto carnivore type diet. So let me explain. If you look at the two diets and you compare them in terms of their benefits, pros and cons, it's not like a close game. It's not like one team wins 5-4. It's more like 100-0. The incidence of obesity, of hypertension, of diabetes, of atherosclerosis and heart disease, and erectile dysfunction, and cerebrovascular disease, and dementia, and kidney failure, and autoimmune disease, and abdominal pressure syndrome from the lack of fiber with hemorrhoids, varicocele, varicose veins, diverticulosis, diverticulitis, appendicitis, hiatal hernia, gastroesophageal reflux disease. What I'm trying to say is cancer. All of these diseases are increased with a meat-based diet in comparison with a plant-based diet. There's no way to win. The only thing you have to do with a plant-based diet is you got to supplement with B12. It's not even close. There's no gain to it.
Terrific. So next question, how do you prepare your beetroot juice? You add extra sugar.
Okay, now when you start talking about adding sugar, what you're reminding me is a Kenyan guy, Kipchoge. Kipchoge had set the world record for the marathon not that long ago where he ran under 2 hours. And he said that he would guzzle down a giant container of iced tea and he would put lots of sugar into it. So if you're going to run, you know, a 26-mile race, go ahead and put some sugar into your iced tea. But for a regular person, I wouldn't make a habit about that because I think it would ruin your teeth. But for optimal athletic performance in the short term, you could do that. And I would use organic sugar. I wouldn't use some of the beet juice sugars or something where they might be, they're not organic because they could be spraying all kinds of toxic herbicides and pesticides on them. But that would be the theoretical reason for it. I think beet juice energizes people because number one, there's got intrinsic sugars. Number two, it hydrates you. Number three, it has precursor nitrates. Beets are real high in the nitrates. So for those reasons, I think it can energize a person. I actually like it as a caffeine substitute because caffeine, you know, has a half-life of 8 hours. It'll predispose you to being kind of having insomnia. You don't even if you sleep, you don't sleep as deep. Whereas with the beet juice, you don't get the insomnia effect.
Great. Sorry, I had to fix something here. Is it safe to eat raw sprouted grains?
I don't have much experience with that. I know some people say broccoli sprouts are good. I know Dr. Greger has a whole thing at his channel about how he sprouts. I think it was broccoli sprouts, and he really likes them. And I know alfalfa sprouts have a bad reputation as potentially being associated with infections like salmonella. But that's about the limit of my experience with sprouts.
Okay, it says, sir, how to cure cellulitis?
Well, cellulitis is like an infection of the skin and, you know, going into the subcutaneous tissues. So usually it's treated with an oral antibiotic, especially if it's focal and localized in an otherwise healthy person. It could be related to something. You know, if the person has chronic swelling of their leg for whatever the reason, it'll be anytime you have stasis of fluid, you're more likely to get an infection with extravascular fluid. So that could do it. If the patient's more sick, they'll admit them to the hospital, put them on IV antibiotics. It could also be because the tissue is sick intrinsically. You know, the patient could have very poor blood flow to the legs, peripheral vascular disease, peripheral arterial disease, same thing really. Tobacco smokers have poor tissue perfusion. So what I'm saying is one of the things that'll help you to improve is improve your tissue perfusion. How do you do that? Low fat, low sodium vegan diet, no oils, no smoking tobacco, no smoking MJ, you know, avoid alcohol. Again, sort of that idea of make yourself as healthy as you can, and quite often all kinds of problems start to heal themselves. But that's basically it. If it's getting worse, not responding to oral antibiotic, you know, go back to your doctor. And like I said, you might need to be admitted. They'll put a PICC line in your arm and they'll give you IV antibiotics for a couple of days.
Great. What he eats in a day is the next question.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I made a mukbang video. Mukbang, I think I don't know what language it is, maybe Thailand or something like that. It means having dinner together, something like that. And so I made some videos of myself doing that. And basically, I am 100% vegan. I like to eat the low-fat plant foods. I like rice. I like sweet potatoes. I like regular potatoes. All those things are only 1% of calories from fat. They keep you skinny. I'm 61. I have no medical problems. I'm skinny. I got a lot of good energy, good concentration. Everything's good. What else do I like? I like eating frozen vegetables. I think they're really good. They taste good and they're good for you. I like freezing stuff that's been frozen because I think there's a tendency for them to just throw it in the freezer and then package it and sell it. Okay, versus if they're going to leave the item on the shelf, like some of these fruits and stuff, they have a tendency to spray stuff on them, and I don't like that. I've noticed that. They'll smell funny, and I won't ever eat those things again. But yeah, I like frozen vegetables. I like frozen fruits. Let's see, what else? I'll eat beans sometimes. I sometimes eat beans with pasta, only single ingredient pasta. I'm not that big a fan of pasta. My girlfriend likes it, so I'll sometimes eat it. And then she cooks for me. If she's not going to be there the next day, then she'll leave some for me. There's an interesting lady by the name of Lead Safe Mama. Her real name is Tamara Rubin. Her website is tamararubin.com. Her internet name is Lead Safe Mama. And, it was a sad story. 2 of her children got lead poisoning with permanent brain damage when they were young, when they sort of remodeled their house, and the contractor told them they could stay in the house while they sort of sanded off the old paint that had lead in it. And she decided to devote her life to testing foods and other items for lead content. And then she started testing them for all the different heavy metals. So, I haven't fully scouted her out, but I have scouted her out a lot so far. And so far, I've been impressed with what she's doing. And anyways, why am I telling you all this? Because she tests tons of food items, including she tested a whole bunch of pastas. And they often have a slight elevation in cadmium. She said whenever you take a machine and you process something like a pasta into a noodle shape, she says you'll often find a little bit of elevated cadmium. And when you first hear that, you're like, oh, that's bad. Cadmium, it's an inhibitor of intermitochondrial membrane electron transport. But you start looking around, it's hard to find a perfect food that doesn't have a little bit of elevation of something. You get more concerned when there's a high elevation of one of these toxic heavy metals. She tests everything for lead, for mercury, for cadmium, and for arsenic. So I think that's pretty useful. So the bottom line is I'll still eat a little bit of pasta, especially when my girlfriend's around, but I don't have to eat it. I didn't used to eat it just because no one ever cooked it for me. As far as beans, my favorite beans are lentils because they're so low in fat, only 3%, and they taste good. But I'll eat the other beans if somebody cooks them for me. I'm kind of lazy. I usually have somebody cook them for me when possible. I would eat oatmeal in the past because I used to eat oatmeal for like a brunch. And I used to mix it with blueberries, but I don't do that anymore. Now I eat the OMAD diet, 1 meal a day diet for dinner. The reason I do it is because it's convenient. I don't think it's the healthiest thing in the world to do, but I think it's reasonably healthy. First of all, I don't think you need breakfast. I know everybody says you need breakfast. I don't think so. I think that was promoted by the companies that sell breakfast foods. And it's natural for humans to be pretty energetic in the morning. It's the best brain time a person has. Your brain cleans itself overnight from the lymphatic system. So what I'm saying is I get to sleep a little later by not eating breakfast on a work day. And on a home day, I often am doing some complex academic work, like writing a book chapter or something like that. And I want my top concentration to be available. So I try to sit myself in a chair and start working as soon as I wake up. Because I know from experience, if you start doing other stuff, you'll often putz around, be distracted for 3 hours before you sit in that chair. So I try to get to work right away. And then I don't eat lunch at work just because I'm so busy and I don't go home until the work is done. So I just eat dinner when I come home. And it's a little bit like the Roman soldier diet. The Romans, were busy all day long. And then at night, they'd make a campfire, eat, go to sleep, eat a big meal. So those are like the main things I eat. So basically, Dr. McDougall would say, if you're sick and you want to get healthy fast, what you should do is eat 90% of your calories from starch, 5% from veggies, and 5% from fruit, okay? I probably eat more like about 35% from fruits, and another, 5 or 10% from veggies, and then the rest from starch. But I'm perfectly fine with eating more from starch. And I think that's because I'm still young and I exercise a lot. He was talking about more of a patient that's a little bit older with a health problem, trying to reverse it as fast as possible and avoiding the confusion. Because you can get distracted by, a bunch of different things. But you just focus on that. that'll make people pretty healthy. And epidemiology shows that to also be true.
Terrific. Okay, next question. We'll give up the paint chips, I guess, at this point. Is it possible for body to make testosterone if cholesterol is below 200?
Yeah, that's absolute nonsense. Okay, if you look at studies, look at these populations where they eat plant-based diets. T. Colin Campbell's book, The China Study, there were entire provinces in China with total cholesterols of around 90. My total cholesterol, bounces from 90 to 140. And I'm a pretty strong guy in the weight room when I lift weights. At a body weight of 170, I could squat 175 pounds for 100 reps, okay? My strength is pretty good. So what I'm trying to tell you is it's normal. You look at the Yanomamo, you look at the Tarahumara, you're talking about total cholesterols in the range anywhere from 110 to 146, okay? These people are energetic. Look at the Tarahumara. These guys are running over 100 miles in 2 days. The women were running 50 miles in 2 days. They're pretty strong and have a lot of endurance. So what I'm trying to say, that's all a bunch of nonsense. There's a lot of stuff on the internet where they're basically trying to scare people into becoming meat eaters, if you will. Sort of saying, all plant eaters are weak, but the meat eaters are strong. And I do think there's a little bit of some strength benefit you get from meat, and I think there's some benefit you get from the creatine. Just like creatine is a supplement. The animal foods have creatine phosphate, like as an ATP reservoir in the cytoplasm, for example. You can store some of your phosphate, high energy bonds, as creatine phosphate, and thus convert it to ATP more rapidly, have a little bit of increased accessible strength and energy from that. So if I was a 20-year-old athlete, I would say it's okay to eat a little bit of meat. That might make you a little stronger, okay? But I would say in terms of endurance, you don't need it at all. And I think in terms of health, you don't want to mess with it at all. Because the older you get, it reminded me of that Indiana Jones movie where he's climbing up this mountainside and the rocks are falling and then he loses that step and you got to go fast. You don't further lose a step. What I'm trying to say is you become more fragile and you will not be able to get away with as much of stuff without having irreversible tissue damage if you don't get healthier in your habits. I see this every day. I see small strokes in the brain. I see degeneration of the spine, calcification of all the arteries and stuff. So what I'm trying to say is you want to start optimizing your health the sooner the better, because otherwise you'll develop problems that are not reversible, and you just have to live with them, but they detract from what you could do.
Terrific. Here we go. I'm almost 80, have one stent, cholesterol over 300. Doctor has me on 40 milliliters of atorvastatin. Should I take it at my age? Trying plant-based. Thank you, Wanda.
Yeah, that's a very high cholesterol over 300. You could have a familial hypercholesterolemia, but most of the time it's because the person hasn't optimized their diet yet. Me personally, I always want to try to fix my problem by just improving my diet, lifestyle, and habits, because there's no side effects from that. There's no side effect except good ones from improving your diet. Usually when somebody's got a total cholesterol 300, they're eating a high-fat diet. So most likely that's the case. So if I was that person, I would go through my diet and I would try to change all those things. Plus, they put them on a statin. A statin is an inhibitor of the inner mitochondrial membrane electron transport. Thus, it increases the risk of diabetes. And once you get into diabetes, you got a certain amount of time before you can change it. But after time, you're going to destroy your beta cells and you're going to become insulin dependent for the rest of your life and predispose to all kinds of problems. There's also a slight increased risk of cognitive decline. When you're inhibiting your inner mitochondrial membrane, you need lots of AT production in your neurons. That's where it's made, in your mitochondria. So you're interrupting that little mitochondrial powerhouse. Okay, mitochondria are super important. I wouldn't want to do anything to mess with my mitochondria. It's like the foundation of life. People think DNA is the foundation of life. DNA is the blueprints. The mitochondria is actually the energy production center, and you want to keep your energy production as good as you can.
All right, here we go. Do you think we should consume vitamin K2 from vegan sources like natto to have healthy bones?
I don't even think you need to seek out vitamins in any way whatsoever. I think if you just eat low-fat, whole food plants, you get all the vitamins you need. You get plenty of them. I don't think there's any deficiency or problem with them. I wouldn't seek them out. If you want to, you can eat some type of plant, but you don't need to. All these sort of populations where they just eat plant-based, they live in their traditional environments, they're not seeking out supplements or anything. They're just eating the local stuff that grows around them and keeping busy.
So what is the difference between the Spartan monk diet and Jeff Nelson's diet?
Okay, the
There's
Spartan
not a
monk,
daylight between them, to be honest. I'm eating the frozen veggies. I eat greens with every meal too. But I'm reading rice and potatoes and veggies, and maybe I have a beer every now and then. That could be a difference.
yeah, they're both very similar. I did see your diet about video. I thought that was pretty entertaining. But they're very similar. There's no major difference. There's some minor differences. You can watch our videos. I got a video of what I eat. Jeff's got a video of what he eats. You can watch them and see if there's any nuance that you think would help you.
Pretty similar. According to you, is molecular mimicry an unconfirmed hypothesis or theory, or is it actual scientific certainty?
Okay, so what you're talking about with molecular mimicry is the idea of leaky gut. So your gut is a barrier, one cell thick, of cells along your intestinal tract. Your intestinal tract is called the enteric tract. So the gut lining cells, site means cell. So enterocytes are the cells that line your gut. And they normally have tight junctions in between the cells. So let's say this is a cell and this blue pen, let me use a red pen. This red pen would be the tight junction in between. Okay, if you break the tight junction, now there's a gap between the cells. That enables bacteria to get past that barrier lining, the enterocytes. It also enables big chunks of protein to get past there. Normally, you can only dissolve 1, 2, or 3, at the most 3. That's a tripeptide. Peptide bonds connect amino acids through your gut at a time. But when there's a gap between the cells, you got an open spot with no tight junction in there, a big chunk of protein can get through. Molecular mimicry means that if you're eating an animal protein, that your immune system will recognize the animal protein as foreign to your body. But given that it's an animal, it might be similar enough to your own body that antibody cross-reacts with our own body, and it causes autoimmune disease, okay? So that would be autoantibody. Auto means to attack self. Molecular mimicry, meaning that the antigen structure, the structure of the shape of it, because they respond to the shape. Everything by the immune system is by braille. They feel things, and they go, this doesn't feel like it belongs. Okay, so then it can cross-react with their own body. And so, like the way Dr. McDougall describes this, imagine you have a hot dog. A hot dog is like basically you throw an animal into a blender, okay? And then there's some thyroid tissue in there. And when that protein chunk comes through, the antibodies can form to it, and they can cross-react with their own thyroid and damage their own thyroid, okay? So you get exposed to that. If you just search on the internet, just search leaky gut, you'll find tons of articles about autoimmunity, okay? And then how they all happen, there's different variations of them. There's a molecular mimicry mechanism, but there's other mechanisms. There's other mechanisms like the inflammation caused by bacterial endotoxins coming into the body. They can damage tissue. A damaged tissue is a damage associated molecular pattern. An infecting tissue, something like a MAMPS, microbial associated molecular pattern. Okay, then the immune systems have pattern recognition receptors on their surface, and they try to clear out the infection, or they try to clear out the damaged debris. Toxic chemicals that come into our body can damage tissue. So what I'm basically saying is leaky gut is well known as a major mechanism of autoimmune disease. But once you get past the leaky gut, there's a lot of ways that it can cause autoimmune disease. And another one that I think is quite under-recognized is something called netosis. Netosis means that you have inflammation causing activation of your neutrophils. Your neutrophils they're called PMNs, polymorphonuclear leukocytes, because they have a multi-lobe nucleus, like 3 to 5 lobes. And partly that facilitates them moving through narrow capillaries, from moving subintimal, subendothelial for diapedesis. But the other thing it does is when they encounter a bacteria, they first of all will try to phagocytize it, like wrap around it and eat it. But if they can't do that for whatever the reason, they will run this reaction where they open up their plasma membrane and they throw their DNA at it. Their DNA opens up and it becomes like a net. And there's a bunch of antimicrobial chemicals on top of that net that kill the bacteria. They immobilize it and kill it. Okay, so you're probably wondering right now, why am I talking about this? And I'll tell you why I'm talking about it, because something interesting happens. Have you ever heard of the autoantibodies in some of the common immune diseases? They're weird things. Anti-double-stranded DNA. Well, how could the immune system ever see double-stranded DNA if it was all inside a cell? Well, when the nets open up with netosis, it sees double-stranded DNA. It sees histones. You can form anti-histone antibodies, anti-nuclear antibodies. You also kick out mitochondria in the extracellular space, and the immune system will react to them. They can invert and expose their cardiolipin, the intermitochondrial membrane phospholipid, to the outer surface. So what I'm saying is you're exposing all these intracellular chemicals to the extracellular matrix that normally aren't there, and the immune system has access to them, and it forms all these strange antibodies like in lupus, and then that starts attacking the kidney and other parts of the body. So what's the point of all this stuff that I just said? You want to minimize leaky gut, and the way you do that is eat your dietary fiber. That's the big thing that protects it, and then avoid all the things that hurt it, like a lack of dietary fiber, like saturated fat, like vegetable oils are toxic to the lining, and emulsifiers like in processed food, they're toxic to the lining, like F- fluoride and aluminum that's in your municipal tap water quite often, toxic to that lining. There's a lot of chemicals. Carrageenan's toxic to the lining. Alcohol is toxic to the lining. And there's a bunch of other ones. So you want to avoid all those things. The glyphosate sprayed on non-organic soy, toxic to the lining. So because once you let all those bacteria in there and all that damage starts, then the immune system gets hyperactivated, then you get all kinds of autoimmune diseases, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, etc.
Wow, interesting. So, Dr. Rogers, how many hours of sleep do you get per night and recommend?
On a perfect night, I'll get 7 or 8 and be quite happy with that. Sometimes when I'm working, though, I'm real busy and I end up only getting 6. But ideally, I like to not have to have an alarm clock and just get up whenever I feel like it. And for most people, that means trying to go to bed earlier, because we tend to all wake up at about the same time every day. So getting to bed earlier makes a big difference. And there's a whole bunch of other things you can do for sleep hygiene, of course. Avoid bright lights at night, avoid blue lights, your computer screen, your cell phone to the extent you can, avoid stressful things, all that stuff.
Next question says, furthermore, my blood glucose can go as low as 60. So my blood glucose ranges from 60 to 70 to 250 to 300 almost every day. Is this normal?
No, it's not normal to have your blood glucose going over 200. Over 200 with an oral glucose tolerance test is a definition of diabetes. And the oral glucose tolerance test is done in the morning. Okay. Like usually, 7 to 9 o'clock in the morning or something, they'll have you drink some glucose and then they'll check your blood sugar like 2 hours later. If it's over 200, you're diagnosed with diabetes. And the thing though, the reason I think that's a little bit interesting is Nathan Pritikin was funny. He said all Americans are diabetic if you check their blood glucose level after dinner. And what he meant by that is that people tend to eat high-fat meals for dinner, causing insulin resistance. And if you did an oral glucose tolerance test on them, they would fail it. That's another thing, too, about paleo keto carnivores. They'll sometimes tell you, oh, my blood glucose level is good. But what they don't tell you is they're going to fail their oral glucose tolerance test because all that fat that they eat induces insulin resistance. And that insulin resistance has secondary consequences that are bad for their health. But if I was this person who just asked this question, I would start studying diabetes and go see their doctor, because, that's looking like diabetes right there. Okay. And then why is your sugar going so low? 60, it's a bit low. You might be at risk for rebound hypoglycemia. So I would go get some help getting that figured out. And I would start studying diabetes. You'll learn a lot real fast. And the conclusion you'll come to eventually is low-fat plant-based diet is the best thing to optimize insulin sensitivity and protect you against type 2 diabetes.
Next question, Dr. Rogers. This may be something easy, but are there any minimum real protein intake a day for someone who is trying to make muscle gains?
Yeah, now that's a difficult question because, like I said, we really don't need much protein to be healthy and to have good endurance. But do we get some benefit from having a little more protein intake for trying to actively build and grow muscle? And you might also have a little bit of benefit, like I said, if you're a bodybuilder athlete and you're 20 years old, from the creatine phosphate. I would not take the supplement creatine phosphate because I think that increases the risk of kidney problems. I think it increases the risk potentially of cancer. I think it potentially increases the risk of tendon tears. So I would not recommend the supplement. The other thing I would tell you is I would never take a protein powder. As a matter of fact, I will not eat any food that's in powder form, because I was studying toxicology, and you can look this up at Consumer Reports. Tons of spices, protein powders, other powdered foods, cocoa and all this other stuff. They're real high in contaminants with heavy metals. What happens is, imagine you're a company selling a powdered food. You just throw a little heavy metal in there, whatever it is, lead or something. It makes the powder weigh more. You can sell it for more money. You'd be amazed how common that is. So I would never eat any food in powder form. And if it's a protein too, they tend to have tons of glutamate, and that's kind of like MFG, manufactured free glutamate, or MSG, monosodium glutamate. And the gist of it is that That has like a stimulant effect. It's an excitotoxin on the brain. It has a bit of neurotoxicity, so I would not do it. But why do I tell you all that? What I would say is, if you're 20 years old, you're on a Division I college team, you're trying to keep your scholarship or whatever, win NCAs, I would look the other way if you had a couple of eggs or you drank some skim milk or something, okay? But once you get older, you don't want to mess with that stuff anymore because, for example, why did I not drink? I used to drink skim milk for, about a decade when I was a vegetarian but not a full vegan. I was sort of a lacto vegetarian. But then the more I kept reading about milk being associated with autoimmune disease, with prostate cancer, with cancer in general, and then, accelerating the hay flick limit, cell replication, I said, oh, forget this, and I stopped it.
Great. So let's see. Can I safely stop aspirin? I had MI and triple bypass 5 years ago. I'm whole food plant-based now for 6.5 years.
That's something you got to work out with your doctor, because it's given as an anticoagulant, antiplatelet medication. So you'd have to work that out with your doctor because they probably have some type of protocol. Maybe they got data on that. But, for patients like, Esselstyn's patients, the patients who followed his diet, that gives you great protection against recurrent coronary artery events. So I would study Dr. Esselstyn's work, and I would discuss with your doctor whether or not you could come off the aspirin. So I'd say you have to work with your doc on that one.
Question, I no longer consume olive oil, but use it as a skin softener. Any issues with this?
I don't have any experience with putting olive oil on the skin, but I'm usually not a big fan of it. Olive oil's got this great reputation. They named extra virgin olive oil, and it sounds like this sweet little innocent thing, your future bride or something. Olive oil, these are heavily processed foods. These are complex processed chemicals. I would not mess with them. Olive oil is not just MUFA, monounsaturated fatty acid. It's also got quite a lot of sat fat, 11 to 14%. It's got a lot of omega-6 fat in it. It's not a healthy thing. I don't like having anything to do with it. And who knows what other additives are in there.
Good. What specific maker to use for amino acid supplements if one is low or very low protein diet to reverse mild kidney failure? Thank you very much.
Okay, so talking about a serum creatinine of 1.3. Well, having a very low protein diet's a good thing. And like Kempner was putting all his patients on about 4% of calories from protein, and they were doing very well. And he wasn't using any type of amino acid supplement that I'm aware of. Okay, you can use an essential amino acid supplement that's cheaper, and you could try to get your total daily protein intake, somewhere down low, maybe around 0.4 grams per kilogram per day, something like that, maybe as low as 0.3. I would work with a dietitian, somebody like Jennifer Moore. You could even do a telehealth consult with her. She's real nice. She's real smart. Watch her videos on YouTube. She's got a bunch of them. You'll see she's really good. Or find one more local to yourself, and they can help protect you against kidney decline. But like I said, I would also read Lee Hull and Jennifer Moore's books, and you'll basically see everything good's in plant food, everything bad's in animal foods and processed foods, and then you protect your kidney. What you're basically doing is it's almost like pre-digesting your food. You're avoiding all the toxic stuff that puts a burden on your kidney, like the excessive phosphates, like all the gut toxins if you're not eating enough fiber, all the animal protein and its related acidosis, all the sodium and its related vasoconstriction. You don't want that. So that's how you protect your kidneys. And so what I'm trying to say is I actually think people could lower their protein more than is widely realized. There's a guy by the name of Goldiner, and Nathan Pritikin had written about him. And they had all these patients who were starving, and they had to, restore their health. And a lot of patients were fed only 2.5% of calories from protein. That's a super low amount of protein, 2.5%. I'll bet you that's in the ballpark of 15 grams of protein per day for the average size man, let's say. And they did great, okay? So this idea that you need to take these high amounts, it's ridiculous, I think. I think, the average American man is eating around 100 grams of protein today, when they really probably only need, about 20, maybe 25. And that's a little bit on the low side. Some people say they should have like 30, but what I'm trying to say is they're eating triple the amount they need, the typical person. So you can really minimize it pretty low. And you can also check. You say, well, how am I doing? Check your serum albumin. Your serum albumin, you'd like to see it between 4.5 to 5.5. And as long as you're keeping it over 4, you're doing pretty good. If your serum albumin starts dropping, then you're going too low on your protein, okay? But the reason I tell you, you also should be checking your urine for proteinuria. Typically, when you lower your dietary protein, paradoxically, you will lower the amount of protein going into your urine. You'll have less proteinuria. And you'll also typically raise your serum albumin, which is what you want. Lee Hull, who wrote multiple books, and the guy's really good on kidney function, he said, if your serum albumin is going up, you're winning the game. If your serum albumin is going down, you're losing the game. And minimizing dietary protein is one of the best ways you can protect yourself, and also being 100% vegan to protect your kidneys.
Great. We're back on the Substack questions here. Is it possible that excess talking for extended periods of time can reduce immunity? Wondering if the vocal cords being overtaxed can affect the vagus nerve in a negative way.
I think it depends what you're talking about. Okay. You know, and it depends who you're talking to and what you're talking about. You remember Einstein when he said time is relative? And he said time is relative. He said if he's talking to a woman who he's attracted to, an hour conversation seems like a minute. If he's talking to somebody who's annoying him, then a minute conversation sounds like an hour. So I'm kind of kidding, but I think that's about where it's at.
I'm a 68-year-old woman, have been diagnosed with osteoporosis. Doctor wants on 1,200 milligrams of calcium with D3, 80 milligrams protein, and take biophosphonates to build bone. I'm concerned about side effects. Can resistance training do the job alone?
Well, I think that's a little bit funny because she's talking about 1,200 milligrams a day of calcium. That's a lot of calcium. Persons who took 1,400 milligrams or more of calcium per day, they had a 2.6 times increased death rate. When you take all that calcium at once, it's like a bolus of calcium coming into your blood. Calcium is a clotting factor that can cause a transient hypercoagulability. Thrombose your coronary arteries, not a good idea. Okay. The other thing that's funny is those bisphosphonate drugs are dangerous. They can potentially cause osteonecrosis of your jaw, your mandible. They can potentially increase your fracture rate if you've been on them for a long amount of time. And then the other thing that's funny is if you look at the Bantu women in South Africa, there's lectures on this. Pritikin talked about this. Dr. McDougall talked about this. That typically, before birth control, women used to typically have about 10 babies. All right. So the Bantu women don't have birth control. They're having about 10 children on average. They nurse the average child for about 3 years. They have hardly any dietary intake of calcium, and they don't have any problem with osteoporosis. So what I'm trying to say is your bone is not the same thing as calcium. Animal foods increase the risk of osteoporosis because the acidic animal protein causes pH buffering, whereby calcium is pulled out of the bones. You pee your bones in the toilet as part of the situation, and that causes osteoporosis. So you want to avoid the animal foods. Okay, but exercise also builds stronger bones. Excessive dietary salt intake also contributes to metabolic acidosis. It does that because the chloride is an anion, negatively charged, and it displaces the bicarbonate from the blood. So it causes a low-grade metabolic acidosis. So that can also cause some need for pH buffering. So that's something, too. I would avoid excessive dietary salt, and I would exercise a lot. The doctors say the way of being a doctor works is doctor's job is not to make sure you get better. No one cares about you. Okay. What the doctor cares about is they're under pressure. Every clinic, every hospital in the Western world has a bean counter that's on that doctor's case. Okay. And that bean counter is saying, you know what? There's a clinic across town, a hospital across town where the doctors in their clinic are doing more work than you. So you need to do more work or we're going to let you go. Okay. And so that doctor's under lots of pressure. Go as fast as possible. Also, that doctor doesn't want to get sued. In order to not get sued, it doesn't matter if you get better. It doesn't matter if you have a terrible outcome and you go die. They could care less. The patients are irrelevant. Patient outcomes are irrelevant. There is no such thing as a doctor posting their record, their score. You know how a sports team says, we won the championship last year. We're a great team. We're undefeated. We got 10 victories and no losses. There's no such thing in medicine, and there never will be, because if they had to post their records, it would be so embarrassing that they couldn't do it publicly. Okay, here's the internal medicine doctor. We have 1,000 patients, 0 cures for hypertension. 1,000 coronary artery patients, 0 cures. 1,000 type 2 diabetics, 0 cures. 1,000 obesity patients, 0 cures. Okay, then you go to somebody who's a health coach, with no medical degree, no degree whatsoever. They put everybody on a low-fat vegan diet. They'll cure almost all their diabetes, almost all their hypertension, almost all their obesity. So they'll never post those cures. So anyways, that's what I'm saying. I would be very hesitant to take any of those medicines. You got to work with your doctor, work that all out, but read about the Bantus, and I think you'll you'll see what I'm talking about.
3 questions here. Have you heard of naturopathic physician who talks about the blood type diet, eating according to blood type? If so, what are your thoughts? Thoughts on mainstream cancer treatments? If you were diagnosed today, what route would you most likely take for treatment? Standard, integrative, alternative? Would you consider writing a book that would appeal to young 20-year-olds to learn about the benefits of whole food plant-based diet? Okay, here's some questions.
Okay, I'll answer number 3 first. I don't think I would write a book for 20-year-olds. Okay, so many of them have no attention span. You're lucky to get them to read a Twitter message. And I'm kind of joking, but they all think they're immortal. Okay, good luck trying talking to a 20-year-old. Okay, they're going to be like, I saw a bodybuilder, man, and he was really buffed out. He was a lot more buffed out than you. So I think I'm going to go with his advice if you don't mind. Okay, because I've talked to some of these young guys. Okay, and they're eating all this protein supplements and all this crap, making themselves sick. Okay, there's not many like yourself here with this question that are motivated to learn all this stuff, and the books that are out there will be good enough to help you get started. Okay, the next thing about mainstream cancer treatments, and now that's a little bit of a touchy subject too. You can only say so much about that. I can tell you I made one video about Gerson, and it was taken off the web. Okay?
Really?
Yeah.
Just talking about it?
Yeah, I didn't even really go into much detail. I simply said, this is what they say on their website. It was taken off the web. But I would tell you this. One of the things that I would do, anytime you want to achieve something in life, it's usually helpful to go find somebody who's already achieved what you are trying to achieve. Okay, so let's say you got cancer. Let's say you even have metastatic cancer. I would ask the question, well, who has had metastatic cancer and had incredible survival? Can I maybe learn something from them? And if it's just one person, you might say, well, they got lucky. But as you start seeing more and more of them, you could consider that valuable information. There's a lady by the name of Kelly Turner. She worked at one of these famous cancer centers out east. I think it was Sloan Kettering. And she had a patient with long-term survival of metastatic cancer. And she's like, wow, that's fantastic. What happened? What did you do? And the patient started telling her all these things like, I exercised, I ate a plant-based diet, I managed my stress, I was involved in my care. Okay, she's like, that's fantastic. And then she tried telling that to some of the oncologists. And they're like, it's anecdotal information. They could care less. And so then she started looking at all the journals and found all these long-term cancer survivors, and she started seeing a pattern that they often had eaten a plant-based diet, exercise, managed their stress, etc. Okay, so then she started going and interviewing them, and she wrote a book about it called Radical Remission, which is quite good. And then you go on the internet, and you'll see some of these long-term cancer survivors. Look up Ruth Heidrich. You know, she had metastatic breast cancer. She survived. She's still alive. At her 90th birthday, she was diagnosed in her mid-40s with metastatic breast cancer, told to make a will, told she was going to die. We'll try some chemo, but they don't think it's going to work. Okay, so anyways, what I'm saying is I would study long-term survivors of metastatic cancer. You'd be amazed how much you learn from that. And I would take a look at what Kelly Turner has to say. That's how I would get started. And then once you go down that path, the next thing you got to learn the difference between somatic mutation theory and the metabolic theory of cancer. Somatic mutation theory is what's in all the med school textbooks, and it basically says a toxin damages your DNA. That mutation causes the cell to grow out of control, and that's cancer. There's not much you can do. We'll try chemo, surgery, radiation. Okay, that's med school textbook cancer. But the more valuable one, I think, is a deep understanding is the metabolic theory of cancer. Okay, metabolic theory of cancer is like Otto Warburg, he won the Nobel Prize in 1931. If you expose a cell to hypoxia, the cell can revert to largely anaerobic metabolism. Okay, and it's thought that cells from an evolutionary perspective, early on in the world, there wasn't really that much oxygen available, and it was sometimes intermittent in its availability, and that they could sometimes transform themselves or transition back and forth between oxygen or non-oxygen metabolism. Oxygen-related metabolism is typically called respiration. Non-oxygen metabolism is typically called anaerobic or fermentation. So anyways, it's thought that some cells, when you injure their mitochondria, most often due to hypoxia, lack of oxygen availability, they'll transform into a cancer cell that runs largely on fermentation, for example. That's why they take up 100 times more glucose and then get a positive PET scan, FDG PET scan. Okay, so I would learn all about all of that stuff. And once you start going down that path, what I love about the metabolic theory of cancer, it gives you lots of ideas on what to do, because you end up then with a battle. Here's the battle. It's between the healthy cells that surround the cancer cell and the cancer cell. And basically, there's a microenvironment around the cancer cell. Anything that favors the cancer growth is bad. Anything that favors the normal cells over the cancer is good. So good tissue oxygenation favors the healthy cells, inhibits the cancer cells. Acidosis favors the cancer cells. The cancer cells, as a matter of fact, they pump acid into their periphery because that paralyzes the immune system. Guess what else paralyzes the immune system? High-fat diets. So a high-fat diet would be like the stupidest thing you could do, all right? And the animal proteins contributing to acidosis, so I don't think that's a smart thing to do. Excess dietary sodium contributes to acidosis, like I just talked about, displacing chloride displacing bicarbonate, okay? The acidosis from the meat, from the excessive amounts of methionine, for example, sulfur-containing amino acids, and that partly being metabolized to sulfuric acid. So that also creates an unfavorable tumor milieu, tumor microenvironment. So you want to avoid all those things. Excessive psychological stress, that also paralyzes the immune system. Cortisol is the acute stress hormone. And the way you remember that is being chased by a tiger in the dark. All you care about is surviving the next 30 minutes. You know, climb a tree, whatever you got to do to get away from the tiger, so to speak. But the point is, your immune system doesn't need to function when you're trying to survive the next 30 minutes to get away from a tiger. So cortisol causes hyperlipidemia. That suppresses the immune system. The cortisol itself suppresses the immune system. So you don't want that. So like the worst you could do would be eating high-fat, high-sodium diets and being stressed out. Okay, so there's a lot of things a person can do to minimize their stress, et cetera, and those things all help. But I think all of that goes into the approach. And you'll see that. She wrote, Kelly Turner talks about that. So we'll talk about the 10 things that long-term survivors of cancer typically do. So anyways, I think that would be useful to you.
Great.
Okay, so, now, next, there was one last question if we want to do
the
it.
blood type diet, yeah.
Yeah, I think blood type diet is nonsense.
Good. Next question. What's the role of salt with the adrenals? I know salt's a vasoconstrictor. Is it necessary for normal adrenal function? And what's your favorite food?
Oh, well, you're not going to deplete yourself of sodium. If you just eat plant-based diet, you think about all these populations that existed before modern humans. They worried about starvation. They just ran around eating plant foods. It's a lot easier to eat plant foods. We don't got sharp teeth. We can't, pierce flesh. We're not like a big predator or something. Yeah, we can throw a stick, we can throw a spear, but that's easier said than done, okay? Good luck, why don't you go out to the Serengeti and try to catch an antelope, okay? It's not that easy to do. You can pick plants pretty reliably. So I don't think salt's much of an issue with the adrenals, because I know there's all this stuff about mineralocorticoids, all that stuff, but all those diseases are super rare, like Addison syndrome, like JFK had Addison syndrome. That's like, zebraic stuff. When I say zebraic, what I mean by that is when you're talking about disease, there's an old saying in medicine. If you hear hoofbeats, you think of a horse. You don't think of a zebra, okay? You don't think of an okapi. You don't think of, a unicorn, okay? And so what I'm saying is that's like a really rare endocrinologic stuff, all that Addison's disease stuff. So that's it.
Great. Next, 77 have exostomia. I don't even know how to say that. For about the past 5 years, it was around the same time I was diagnosed with exostomia that my digestion started to become somewhat compromised, manifesting as bloating. This has not abated. It's only recently occurred to me that this may be due to the decreased production of salivary amylase that accompanies exostomia. I eat a very clean, whole food, plants only, starch-based diet with no oil, no salt, except occasional condiment, and fruit dates for any sweetening. Do you have any suggestions about how to best manage exostomia? Is that how you say it? How I might?
I think it means xerostomia. I think they mean dry mouth. That's what I think they're talking about, and how to increase salivary amylase, the enzyme. Okay, so what am I thinking is, do you maybe have blockage of your saliva production? You could have a stone in your submandibular duct. You sometimes see those. I sometimes see them bilaterally. That'll diminish saliva production. You could also have something like Sjogren's syndrome, a disease of your salivary glands, your parotid glands, diminished saliva production. I would recommend you go see an ear, nose, and throat doctor or a dentist and see if they can help you figure out what's causing it and what to do about it. If they're worried about stones, they'll send you for a CT scan of the neck. CT scan of the neck will also show you, evidence of Sjogren's syndrome. If they think it's a Sjogren's syndrome that's associated with dry eyes and dry mouth, they can test for that. They can test for antibodies. It's an autoimmune disease. But yeah, I would try to get figured out what's causing it.
Very good. Wondering about skin cancer. Husband is constantly battling skin cancer. What causes it besides staying out of the sun? What can be done to prevent it? Is it a toxic load internally that's causing it?
Well, most skin cancers are not that aggressive, and the people usually don't die from them. Excessive sun exposure certainly is a contributing factor. melanoma is sort of a different subset of so-called skin cancer, and it's not as directly related to sunshine or anything. It's a more aggressive cancer. At this point, you're going to be working with your dermatologist and sometimes with your ear, nose, and throat doctor if you got head and neck cancer around, the head, wherever it's located. So I think you kind of got to work with them. But I'd also tell you, again, McDougall told you guys the truth, and he pointed you in the right direction. And what did he say? If a patient has earwax, I would tell them to eat the low-fat vegan diet, because basically everything in your body works better when it has good blood flow. The way you get good blood flow is low-fat vegan diet with no oil. That's what you need to do, because if you have high fat, you get blood sludging. You thicken the blood. Okay, if you have high dietary sodium, I should also say low sodium. If you get high dietary sodium, that's a vasoconstrictor. So you want good blood flow because that helps your body to heal. And like I said, too, for any type of cancer, avoiding acidosis favors the normal cells over the cancer cell. Avoiding things that stress you out, raise your cortisol, which means get your sleep, manage your stress, avoid caffeine. That helps prevent immune suppression. High-fat diets cause immune suppression. High sodium also has a tendency to activate platelets. And when you get a lot of platelets activated, they have a tendency in the blood to sort of encircle metastasizing cancer cells. And what they do, remember, everything by the immune system is by Braille. They have to feel a cell. So what happens is normally is in the blood, they can feel if a cell is cancer. It's something called CAMPs, cancer-associated molecular patterns. And they got pattern recognition receptors on the immune cells. But if that cell is encased in platelets as it's traveling through the blood, they can't feel it. So that's another reason why high dietary sodium tends to hide metastasizing cancer cells. But, a lot of skin cancer patients do really well. They don't die from it very often.
Diagnosed with ANCA vasculitis in January 2020, have been taking 1,000 milligrams mycophenolate twice a day to keep the symptoms at bay. In the beginning of my diagnosis, I tried the elimination diet for 2 weeks, eating only sweet potatoes, green veggies, zucchini, cabbage. My symptoms got worse. I could barely move without extreme pain, so I stopped and continued to eat a typical plant-based diet of rice, white potatoes, vegetables, fruits. For a few months, my labs continued to come back with high inflammation readings. Any hope for a cure?
I don't have much experience with ANCA vasculitis. That's a real rare disease. So it'd be hard for me to answer that one. In general, kind of like what I said earlier, preventing leaky gut or other things that contribute to inflammation tend to be helpful for autoimmune diseases. And I would kind of go through everything I could, like everything that causes autoimmune disease, and I would try to avoid all those things. Everything that causes leaky gut, everything that causes inflammation, everything that's sort of known to be a toxic and damaged tissue, like having fluoride in your body, okay? Like glyphosate. Glyphosate is glycine phosphate, the stuff sprayed on non-organic soy. It's thought to substitute itself for glycine in proteins, and that can damage the protein. For example, collagen has every third residue a glycine amino acid, and you can substitute glyphosate in there and it'll distort your collagen and damage tissue. So when you damage the tissue, the immune system will then recognize it potentially as a foreign tissue and cause an inflammatory response to it, trying to clear the body of it. So what I'm saying is, by being as healthy as possible, that might help you. But I don't have much personal experience with ANCA vasculitis, so I would go to the rheumatologist and see if they could help you with it. And
there's an extreme version of the elimination diet called water fasting, water only fasting, and that would be, I would be curious, depending if the person is a suitable subject for that, to see whether fasting caused it to stop, because apparently the elimination diet didn't. But
yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I can also tell you one thing Dr. McDougall said. He said that until you've tried only eating sweet potatoes and nothing else for about 3 months, you haven't tried everything you can do with food. And by the way, he thinks sweet potatoes are the healthiest food in the world. I think he's probably right, because unlike, they're like regular potatoes and having only 1% of calories from fat, but in addition, they've got lower protein. They're only about 4.5% of calories from protein. Regular potatoes about, almost double that, almost 8 to 9% of calories from protein. And people that eat them, like the Papua New Guinea, they would eat 93% of their calories from sweet potatoes. And they were real healthy, robust, and active, doing a lot of physical work. So I think, like Jeff is saying, the extreme elimination diet is to fast for a while and see if you get better from that. That might give you a clue, and then gradually add back foods. You can try all of that stuff. But I just don't have that much experience with the disease, so I can't say much more.
What's your thought on oatmeal? As it has saturated fat, is it good or bad food?
Well, I think oatmeal is a good food compared to animal foods. It's got in the ballpark of around 15% fat. I don't personally eat it anymore, but I used to eat it when I ate brunch or if I ate lunch. because it's a very wet food. I would just eat plain oatmeal with water. You don't want to eat that at night because you're going to have to wake up the void more. A man, as you get older, you got a little bit of a prostate enlargement probably, and you don't want to be waking up extra times to void. But I would also definitely get it organic, because if the oatmeal is not organic, they'll spray glyphosate on it. They do that because it helps facilitates the harvest, gets the leaves to drop off of stuff and facilitates the harvest of it. So I would not eat it in that context. And the other thing too about oatmeal, I would try to eat it a little bit less processed. The more processed it is, like instant oatmeal is more processed than just regular
steel cut.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. We talked about this the last time. Xylitol, good or bad for gut or oral
We already
health?
did it. It's a bad idea. It's prothrombotic. It's a cardiovascular risk. I'd stay away from it.
Right. And then if you had to take either acetaminophen or ibuprofen, which would you take?
I don't like either one, because like Tylenol is an intermitochondrial membrane inhibitor, and that's bad. Ibuprofen is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, increasing your risk of leaky gut. So they're both bad choices.
Yeah.
Most people, in my experience, they're always looking for a drug. And I would say try to figure out everything else you could do first. A lot of times if you fix the leaky gut and all this other stuff by going low-fat vegan, like Dr. McDougall said, until you figure out what everything else you need to do, eat 90% of your calories from low-fat starch, and then 5% from veggies, 5% from fruits. See what happens from there. And in the meantime, study whatever else you need to do. I would do that, because I don't like either of those drugs. There are some times when people have to take a drug they don't want. Fine, but I would strongly look for other options. What's his name? Dr. Neil Bernard. He wrote a book called Foods That Cause Pain, or Foods That Fight Pain. And it's going to come down to what I pretty much said too. Avoid the things that are associated with leaky gut. So I would pretty much leave it at that, but I don't like either one of those choices.
So the third one is, what would you recommend for treating Crohn's in a childbearing age female?
Okay, well, Crohn's is another disease thought due to leaky gut, whereby you're getting the bacterial endotoxins, the bacteria themselves, through the gut lining, because it has high permeability from the lack of tight junctions. You're going to have to gradually change to a healthier eating diet. If you all of a sudden eat a whole bunch of fiber, that's going to make you sicker. But gradually go towards eating a plant-based diet. Dr. McDougall's got lots of testimonials of patients who have cured themselves of inflammatory bowel disease and other autoimmune diseases by eating, low-fat plant-based diets.
Great. Are PVCs, premature ventricular contractions, worrisome when not felt at all, but recorded as happening pretty much all the time? My 82-year-old McDougalling dad has been told they are benign, but I can't help think that over time they're not good, kind of like an engine that doesn't run right, it'll fail faster. Since he's low tech, no cell phone or internet, what are your thoughts on an implanted heart loop recorder?
I don't know. I haven't really studied implanted heart loop recorders. I've seen lots of them, but I don't know how great they are. And one of the things I worry about is, I think a lot of cardiac disease is due to microvascular disease. By that, I mean, there's a lot of little clotting that's happening that we're usually not that aware of it. When people talk about heart disease, they're usually referring to the epicardial coronaries. Those are the big arteries on top of the heart. And when those are the ones that they talk about a bypass. You have the left main coronary, left circumflex, left anterior descending, the right coronary artery. Triple vessel bypass might be to the right coronary, the LAD, and the circumflex. And what I'm trying to say is there's also a whole bunch of little penetrating vessels that go into the muscle of the heart. And then there's a whole bunch of things that increase your risk of clotting, and especially going back to leaky gut. Then you get increased bacterial endotoxins in the blood. After eating is postprandial endotoxemia. There's two really good scientists named Douglas Kell from England, PhD, and Etheresia Pretorius from South Africa. She's also a PhD. And they found that these bacterial endotoxins, like a catalyst, they would predispose the blood clotting protein fibrinogen to change from a alpha helix, means cylindrical shape, to beta pleated sheath. Beta pleated sheet, secondary protein structure, flat, and they'll stack up like a deck of cards, and they precipitate out of solution. They form a clot, and they are very refractory to lysis, to dissolving. That's called dense matted deposit. So what's the point of all that? The point is that these things increase your tendency to clot, and they cause all these little microscopic clots that can plug up the small arteries in the heart, because a PVC implies abnormal conduction of the cardiac pathway. So what I'm trying to say is you want to avoid all that stuff. Because if you keep on losing more heart muscle from these little tiny clots, taking out tiny segments of cardiac muscle, your arrhythmia is likely to get worse over time. Okay. And what are they going to do if they start finding more PVCs? They're going to pop in a pacemaker, probably. Okay. Or take you back to cardiac cath lab, see if you got more coronary artery atherosclerosis, put a stent in or something. So I'll leave it up to you what you want to do with your doctor. Okay. But what I'm trying to say is I like to try to fix everything I possibly can. In my experience, it's really, really rare you ever meet anybody who's really optimized their diet and their risk factor stuff. Get your fat down as low as possible. Avoid all the bad stuff, anything from an animal, anything processed, any oil. Do all the good stuff and see where you're at with that. Because otherwise, the inevitable path, if you go down the conventional medical path, they're going to monitor you for all this stuff. And if they see an uptick in it, they'll probably pop in a pacer, do a cath. They'll do a cath and pop in a pacer. And so if you want to go down that path, fine. Maybe you need to go down that path. Maybe that's going to help you. But I would try to prevent it first. So I would avoid all this. There's a lot of little things people do. They don't even think about it. Like I wouldn't, well, you said he doesn't have a cell phone. I wouldn't put a cell phone in the front pocket right in front of the heart. And you EMF the heart, electromotive force, open up voltage-gated calcium channels for nothing. I would avoid all caffeine. I would avoid anything I thought might be cardiotoxic. I would actually avoid anything I think is mitochondrial toxic. I actually think mitochondrial toxins are a very underrated cause of disease. Because what does the heart have to do? It has to pump. So if you diminish its energy capacity, then you diminish its pumping capacity. I think that's under-recognized. I think amyloid clotting is a very under-recognized thing. So anyways, those are some thoughts.
What is the best diet? In my opinion, my experience, I learned about and have been following Dr. Esselstyn's Prevent and Reverse for 25 years. Outstanding results. There appear to be so many crazy ideas, such as keto is one of them.
Yeah, keto is like almost the opposite of the Dr. Esselstyn diet. The low-fat vegan diet is the only thing proven to reverse coronary artery disease, and it's been proven pretty extensively. Dr. McDougall, Dr. Walter Kempner showed that he could reverse coronary artery disease. He reversed the findings on all these EKGs. He was reversing congestive heart failure. He had all these hearts that shrunk in size and functioned better after putting them on that diet on the chest X-ray. Nathan Pritikin had similar findings. Dr. John McDougall had similar findings. Okay, Dr. Dean Ornish had similar findings. So that's pretty established. And sort of what I would say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You got something that works. The proper attitude is sort of, there's something I can do. It's not inevitable. I have to become like the typical American, fat, sick, and stupid after 60. Instead, you can be thin and energetic and mentally sharp. You got great odds if you stick with these low-fat vegan diets, no oil and stuff. So I would definitely do that. It is getting a little more complicated nowadays. There's more issues you want to be aware of as far as like toxicology, for example. Like it's better to eat organic. That's one big step in a positive direction. It's not perfect, but there's advantages to that. And then there's other related things to know. But that's the big thing. That's the giant step to be low-fat vegan.
Okay, so let's go back to the questions on the video. Let's see. Question regarding cancer is metabolic versus chromosomal damage.
Okay, well, that's a little bit like what I was alluding to earlier, somatic mutation theory versus metabolic theory of cancer. And what I'm trying to tell you is you definitely want to study metabolic theory of cancer, because as soon as you study metabolic theory of cancer, you see that it makes sense. There's a good book called Tripping Over the Truth by Travis Christofferson, and it's where he explains the metabolic theory of cancer. And it's a very good book. The guy's a good teacher of biochemistry. And he's friends with the other guy named Thomas Seyfried. Seyfried's like Seyfried. And Seyfried is a bright guy. He's like this PhD scientist. I think he's out of Boston University, and he's done some really good research on the metabolic theory of cancer. However, in my opinion, I disagree with him on his theories of diet, okay? He sort of recommends a ketogenic diet, which I think is actually completely wrong for multiple reasons. The entire Krebs cycle, it can run backwards on glutamine, okay, for biosynthesis. So you don't want to be doing that, okay? I think low-fat vegan is the best diet for these patients in general. Plus, there's also something, I don't want to get into too much biochemistry, but you can even look up something called the reverse Warburg effect of Lisanti, okay? And the reason why I mentioned the reverse Warburg effect of Lisanti, he wrote a nice paper on that, is the cancer cells were feeding on ketone bodies. That's why I think all this ketone stuff, it's nonsense. I think it's stupid for cancer, in my opinion.
Okay, so now we've got a question. Why not supplementing with small dose of omega-3 if cholesterol, BMI, dietary fats are already very low? Surely a small yellow vegan capsule of omega-3 won't form too many low clots, right? I read omega-3 are useful to keep cell membrane elasticity high and for good mood and nutrition facts. That's Gregor has a video about omega-3 preventing brain senescence or something like that.
Okay, I'm laughing because, Jeff over here with VegSource, he's got the best videos about omega-3s and how they're really not a good idea for a brain supplement. Okay. Jeff's done fantastic videos about omega-3 supplements, about nuts, about high-fat plant foods. Fat is fat. Just because fat comes from a plant doesn't mean it's magic and all of a sudden doesn't cause all these problems. It does. And when you start, the other thing too is you had a lot of implicit assumptions in there. You had the assumption that more omega-3 is better. I don't think it is. I think people are overdosing on these omega-3s. And I also think once you're at the end of the line with DHA and EPA, the full long chain length, you can't revert back to the shorter chain lengths that your body might actually use. If you just eat low-fat plant foods, you get more than enough omega-3s and you avoid all these problems. Once you take a supplement, you worry about mercury contamination. You worry about lipid peroxidation in the processing plant. You worry about the gelatin covering on it. And then fat itself is intrinsically obesogenic, diabetogenic, atherogenic. It's a bad idea. And papers are coming out now that omega-3 supplements increase the risk of atrial fibrillation. Several randomized controlled trials show that. I think omega-3 supplements a bad idea. I agree exactly with what Jeff said in his excellent video about the subject. I wouldn't do it.
One of the things, I've quoted a lot of different studies over the years because this is an ongoing topic of interest. Some more recent ones, I think was at SC, looked at how much omega-3 actually gets into your brain. And they used spinal taps to measure. And people were taking supplements and they measured it over time and so on. You can raise your blood level, but it can have absolutely no effect to the amount that's actually getting into your brain. And I think they realized that you had to be taking 1,400 milligrams, a very high dose a day, which is 6 times or 8 times more than what you buy in the supplements, for example, from Dr. Furman or what's recommended by Dr. Gregor. And this is, they went in, they pierce the dura mater and they go and they take spinal fluid and they measure how much omega-3 is in there based on the supplementation. You have to take in a lot. And when you're taking in that level, even, Dr. Furman on his website cautions against taking in more than like a gram a day because it affects your immune system. You can bleed out more easily, all kinds of things. So it's the research around that is very heavily influenced by people making money selling it, in my opinion. Okay. So next we have, I am on low fat, low protein, low salt, whole food, vegan diet. My blood glucose level can go as high as, I don't know, is this the same person? 250
it's pretty
to
much
280.
the same type of question. Yeah, they sound like a diabetic.
Might be the same one. Yeah. Is creatine safe and should we use it to boost our brains and bodies?
I think it's a bad idea. I briefly talked about it sort of being like a reservoir of high energy phosphates to rapidly replace ATP in an exercising person. But I think the supplements are a bad idea. I bought an entire book to summarize the supplements because I was interested in taking it myself many years ago, about 20 years ago. And the conclusion I came to is that it's a bad idea. And I thought the papers were sort of misleading. In the conclusions, they would say there are no proven increased incidents of kidney failure or cancer related to the supplement. But in the body of the report, they would mention toxic metabolites that could increase your risk of kidney failure or cancer. I think one of them was formaldehyde. It's partly metabolized into formaldehyde. It also increases the risk of tendon tears. Okay. I think it's supplementation thing is a bad idea. Plus, it comes in powder form. All powder form things are at risk to be contaminated with heavy metal to make it heavier to sell for more money.
Okay, next one. I've got nerve damage in my feet. Started, I guess, a couple of years ago. Now eating carbs set my feet on fire. What to do? I've been a raw vegan for years. I started being vegan in 2004. Person says they're lost.
I think it sounds like BS. I think this sounds like a troll comment. Eating carbs sets my feet on fire. That's nonsense. Okay. But, for the sake of can we say anything educational here? A lot of times when people have a neuropathy to their foot, it's like a diabetic neuropathy. And low-fat vegan is the best thing for a diabetic neuropathy because you improve blood flow to the nerve and you also decrease insulin resistance. So by decreasing insulin resistance, you prevent peripheral hyperglycemia, high blood glucose, okay? If you want to read the best paper ever written on diabetes, it's the Michael Brownlee paper. He won the Banting Award in 2004. It's called Unifying Theory of Diabetic Complications. Okay, so there's a couple of cells that in the setting of hyperglycemia, they can't protect themselves because they can't control the amount of glucose that comes into the cell. So high levels of blood glucose, hyperglycemia, will sort of overwhelm those cells and damage the mitochondria. In the postprandial phase, what matters the most is the cells that have too rapid a fat uptake, like skeletal muscle cells. But so what I'm trying to say is by minimizing your insulin resistance, you'll minimize your blood glucose and you will protect your peripheral nerves from neuropathy to the extent that you can. Also, you eat the low-fat vegan diet, you're going to lose body weight. If you have compression of a nerve at the level of the spine, like the spinal foramen, you'll decrease compression of that nerve to some extent. You'll increase tissue perfusion of it, blood supply to that nerve, like it could be the sinovertebral nerve that goes to the disc, for example. It's being compressed, and you'll be likely to decrease the pain. So that's what I would do. As a matter of fact, if you want to see something funny, well, actually, I'll just leave it at that. I think that's good enough coverage of it.
Okay. Here is I cook with MCT oil, C8, C10. I don't know what that means. A healthy alternative to seed oils. Is it processed?
No, I think that's a bad idea. So what this person is trying to do is they read some article that you can improve your health by eating these medium chain triglycerides. Okay, that's something like, I think it's something like caprylic acid, C8, C10. Forget what C10 is. I know C12 is something like lauric acid, but it's all sort of that same stuff. So what's the point? The point is that I don't think it's a good idea. Dr. McDougall had said it. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. Nathan Pritikin had reviewed all the literature on fat up until around 1980, and he came to the conclusion fat is bad. It doesn't matter what type of fat it is. Whatever fat you eat is going to increase your risk of problems. He called it lipotoxemia and lipotoxicity. And he wrote an entire summary of how the more fat a population was eating, the more problems they had. And so this person, what they're thinking is, well, these medium chain triglycerides, they might go directly to the liver and be metabolized like ketone bodies, and that might be helpful in some way. I don't think it's a good idea. Plus, anything you buy from a store or processing, chemical factory, there's going to be contaminants, there's going to be impurities. Like I heard that MCTs are often have impurities of C12, which is metabolized as a long chain fatty acid. I think it's a bad idea. I would stay away from that, It doesn't sound like a smart
Okay, move. Dr. Rogers, high oxalate starches such as potatoes and sweet potatoes, okay. Are these okay? Should we consume calcium with them to prevent oxalate toxicity?
No, I don't think so. Because a lot of people, because what I think happens is, there's different groups sort of pushing for market share, if you will. There's the big agricultural meat producing companies, and they want people to eat meat. So they're always going to try to blame problems on like sugar or something, high fructose corn syrup, okay? And then there's companies that maybe say processed food, and they're going to try to say, oh, plants aren't really that good. What about all these oxalates and all this stuff? And one thing I'll tell you is I sometimes have to look at ultrasounds of the kidney, okay? And one of the most common reasons that ultrasound of the kidney is obtained is it'll say follow-up of NL. NL stands for nephrolithiasis, kidney stones, okay? And here's what you'll see if you look at a lot of kidney stone ultrasounds. Almost all of them have a fatty liver. And what's a fatty liver? It's for a person eating a high-fat diet. It's like pre-diabetes of the liver or diabetes of the liver. So what I'm trying to say is low-fat plant food eaters, they don't get fatty liver. And Dr. McDougall has a good article about this. It's actually kind of recent. And Dr. McDougall has some article about kidney stones and oxalates. So you just go to his website, go to drmcdougall.com and type in kidney stone oxalate. And what you'll see is the oxalates in plant foods tend to be organic, meaning that they're part of the plant. They're part of the living structure. They're bound to the carbons and the calciums, and they're not that well absorbed. We tend to eat them. They go through our digestive tract. We defecate them out. However, if you eat high-fat foods, the high fat tends to displace the oxalates from the plant food and make it more bioabsorbable, more absorbed into your blood, so it can contribute to stone formation. Because that is a common type of kidney stone. It's called so-called calcium oxalate. And what I'm basically saying is, by eating low-fat plant foods, you avoid the availability of simultaneous oxalates and calciums in your blood to predispose to kidney stones. Plus, what puts the calcium in your urine? Calciuria. Primarily acidosis. What causes metabolic acidosis? Especially animal protein. Also high sodium, high salt diets. You know, the sodium chloride, like I was talking about earlier, with the chloride displacement of the bicarbonate. So the biggest thing to avoiding kidney stones is avoid animal foods. Avoid that animal protein. You know, being well hydrated helps prevent them as well. But I think the oxalate component from plant foods is pretty exaggerated.
Okay, great. So next we have, do you think it is sufficient for teenage athletes to stick to a healthy vegan diet, or should there be some lean meat consumed once a week? Thank you very much.
I kind of answered that already.
Yeah. And the question above it is similar. No list of questions on a vegan diet would be complete without one on protein. Dr. Rupi has been in the media a lot preaching that we need a minimum of 1.2 kilogram protein per kilogram of weight.
It must be 1.2 grams, but yeah, that's insane.
Grams.
That's insane. That's a tremendous amount. Yeah. Like I said, you know, even the RDA recommendation, which is too high, is 0.8 grams per kilogram. Okay, so that's an astronomical amount of protein. I think that's insane. You're going to just, you know, put this incredible hyperfiltration workload on your kidneys and dramatically increase your risk of kidney failure. I think that's stupid. And the other thing I'll tell you is, if you go on the internet, you will see nonstop fear and concern about protein deficiency. But if you live in the real world and you look at patients, go to any hospital in the Western world, you will see a line of patients around the block of fat, hypertensive diabetics with coronary artery disease, cerebral vascular disease. Okay, nonstop. And those are the main causes of kidney failure too: hypertension and diabetes, and autoimmune diseases like related to leaky gut. So all the patients, you don't even have to tell me. Let's say I had a really busy day and I was running from one procedure room and I got the resident starting a case in the next room, and I have to walk in the room and do a procedure on a patient 55 years of age and up. I would not even look in the chart. I would automatically assume the patient is diabetic and hypertensive and has coronary artery disease and is probably cognitively slow, because that's how most of them are. You don't even have to look in the chart. That is so common that is considered normal aging. I can tell you, when I look at a brain MRI and I read the brain MRI, typically I'll usually say something like, there are multiple bilateral periventricular flare hyperintensities, most likely due to chronic small vessel ischemic disease, meaning a bunch of small strokes. The referral doctor will write in the chart normal aging. It's considered normal to have a bunch of small strokes. What I'm trying to say is, people in the Western world are so atherogenic, so fat, hypertensive, and diabetic. They all consider it normal aging. It's not. You don't get these diseases at all. Okay, I'll give you a couple papers to refer to. Okay, Lancet Journal, 1929. The author's name is C.P. Donison. He's an Englishman working in Africa and Kenya, where they ate a plant-based diet. 1,800 consecutive admissions of adults to the hospital. He checked their blood pressure. In USA, of black patients, 1,800 consecutive admissions. What percent would you expect to be hypertensive? I can't give you an exact number. I predict at least 70% of them, probably more than that. In Kenya, what percent were hypertensive? 0. What percent of the Tarahumara were hypertensive? 0. What percent of the Yanomamo were hypertensive? 0. So what I'm saying is, they don't get these diseases, okay? You know, they couldn't even find anybody with rheumatoid arthritis in Africa as of up to 1957. Swank went to China in 1960. They couldn't find anybody with multiple sclerosis. So in these low-fat, plant-based communities, they don't get the common Western diseases. So, I mean, you're not going to get a better deal in life than that.
Right. So, 44-year-old female with a CAC score of 69, the LAD, how unusual is this? And what test should I do? I have no symptoms.
Okay, well, I'm also going to say something. Imagine you're a doctor in a hospital. Okay, you got some bean counter on your case, and you better make money for that hospital or they're not going to want you to work there. So you got to make money. Well, the way you make money is you have to sell something, and you have to sell a tangible item. You can sell a drug. It's a great way to make money, especially if you hook them on the drug every day. You can sell an imaging test like a CAT scan, an MRI, X-ray, ultrasound. You can sell a blood test, a colonoscopy, okay? In order to sell a supplement or something, you got to convince the patient they have a deficiency. So what I'm trying to say is, if you've eaten the Western diet, which the vast majority of Americans have, or people in Western countries, you know you have atherosclerosis. It's guaranteed. You know you have it. So why go get a test? And what is it going to show you? You got some calcium in your coronary artery. That means you got a little old scar. So what? You've got some atherosclerosis because you ate a Western diet in the past. The smart thing to do is don't eat a Western diet anymore. Eat an Esselstyn diet or something similar. Spartan vegan diet, the veg source diet of Jeff Nelson. Okay, that will keep your coronaries open. That's what you do. Keep your coronary arteries open. So why radiate your chest with a calcium CT? You know, that's.
I think that's such a great point about these testing and excessive testing. Just assume you've got the problem and take the measures you need to take to, you know, keep yourself well. Don't, why even take the test? Just assume, yeah, I've got probably some heart disease going on. I better clean up my diet. You know, that's a safe thing to do, in my opinion. All right. You know what? Let's kind of pick up the pace a little and see how much more of these we can go through, because we can't go on too terribly much longer. It's Saturday. We got other things to do, right, Peter? So, Dr. Rogers, can you speak about eating bananas with berries and the effects of polyphenol oxidase? Should you not?
Yeah. Okay. Bananas have a high amount of this enzyme, polyphenol oxidase, which sort of removes or neutralizes the flavonols of the berries. So what they're basically saying is, if you put bananas into the same smoothie as your berries, the PPO, polyphenol oxidase, is going to limit the health benefits you get from the flavonoids of your berries. So I think it's a little bit funny in the sense that, number one, I don't really like smoothies because they're so loud. I got to put my ear protectors on. They hurt my ears. Okay, I always have my ear protectors. A lot of times, you know, especially when I'm back in the house with the whole family, there's always somebody making noise. And not even, you know, the girlfriend makes noise. I got to put them on, or there's something outside. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is, you're going to go deaf. Okay, with all these, be careful with these. But make sure you're wearing ear protectors when you make these smoothies. You don't want to go deaf. Okay, so anyways, what else could you do? You could find a fruit that doesn't have so much polyphenol oxidase in there, and you could maybe put that in your smoothie if you want to eat smoothies. But that is why people say you shouldn't mix bananas with berries. So that's what that comes down to. So there is some truth in it, but I would just eat the bananas, just eat the berries. But go ahead.
Okay, so next is Dr. Rogers. I know you don't like soy. How about beans, lentils? Are they a good source of protein? Of course.
Yeah. I can tell you, you know, Dr. McDougall and Nathan Pritikin, they both said it's impossible to be too low in protein on any type of plant-based diet. Like we said, you know, Walter Kempner was feeding people about like 4.2% of calories from protein. The Papua New Guinea eating about 4.4% of calories from protein. Sweet potatoes only have about 4.5% of calories from protein. You really don't need much protein. You know, human breast milk only has about 5 to 6% of calories from protein in our most rapid phase of growth, and that's all we need. Okay, and so we are always going to need less than that the rest of our life. Okay, and by the way, there's sort of a meme going around the internet that I think is total nonsense. This idea that, well, as people get older, they need to eat more protein. Otherwise, they develop sarcopenia, you know, lack of muscle mass. Okay. And I think that's nonsense, because all these sort of like, you know, non-developed countries where they eat plant-based diet, they don't go around looking for protein supplements when they get older. And the older you get, the more vulnerable your kidneys are to increased protein intake. I say, get your exercise, you know. I would not seek out the higher protein. But lentils are a decent bean. Beans in general are in the ballpark of 30% of calories from protein. So you really only need like 5% of your calories, 4% of your calories from protein. So in that ballpark, you know, and you can even eat 2.5%, like I said, the Golden study, for example. So I wouldn't worry about it. If you want to eat beans, fine. They do tend to satisfy hunger a prolonged amount of time. They got a lot of fiber in them. McDougall used to say, he'd recommend not eating more than 1 cup a day, though, in general.
Right.
Because I worry. I'll tell you why I worry about them. Why do I worry about protein as you get older? And Ruth Hydrus wouldn't eat beans, because T. Colin Campbell wrote all the stuff in the China study and his subsequent books, like Whole, for example, that, plant protein is so much better than animal protein, different amino acid composition. Yeah, that's great. But guess what? You know, all the foods, they've got all of the amino acids in them. And if you're eating tons and tons of protein, you're still going to get a lot of methionine. You're still going to get a lot of leucine. You're still going to activate mTOR, mammalian targeted rapamycin, the nutrient sensing pathway that tells the cell to replicate. And potentially, if you give it tons of protein, you're going to accelerate the replication pathway. So what I'm trying to say is, you know, if you're worried about cancer, which, you know, people should be aware of it after they're 35 years of age, I would say, I wouldn't go maxing out on protein intake. I think it's a bad idea. It's bad for your kidneys and it's bad for potential cancer.
Okay, so here's the next one. Beet juice is so expensive. What about using organic beet powder? So there we talked about powders. You're not high on powders, right, Peter?
No, I'm not high in powders because of the risk of contamination. And again, I would say beet juice should be considered a luxury. I only do it like when I'm at work and I got a brutal long day and I got to crank out another 50 cases. Okay, I'll guzzle down the beet juice. It energizes me. Okay, but I don't drink it just for a habit. It's expensive. It does cost. A 32-ounce bottle is going to cost you about $12. That's not cheap. So I wouldn't do it on a daily basis. Maybe if you're a competitive athlete before a competition, that sort of thing.
Okay, here's the next one from House of Fruits. She always starts with according to you. According to you, there's a number of servings of meat, serving being 50 grams per week. That is not proven or likely to cause any disease. In other words, have we proven a strict vegan diet is better than a plant-based diet with a small amount of?
Well, I think you get into the question like T. Colin Campbell said, there is no minimal amount of protein that doesn't cause some increase in your risk of cancer. So it kind of depends on what you're going for. If you're, over 35, I would start thinking you want to minimize your risk of cancer. On the other hand, if you're a 20-year-old athlete and you need to get a little more physical strength for your competition, I think the meat might have a small increase in the ability to generate strength for lifting weights, for example, like, powerlifting, for example. So I could see the argument there. Okay. But for just general health for somebody who's, not in a big competition in a sport, I think it's best to avoid animal foods.
I think it's easier just to do blanketly avoid rather than have some stuff, because if you have some stuff in your fridge and you come home one night and you're hungry and did you eat your 50 grams or whatever she's saying is, the ideal or something like that, now you're going to pig out on what's there. So I just remove everything. Jeff, could you help with this question? I feel as though I've got a pressure in my inner ear. I've also got lots of deafness in this ear over the same time period. It's been getting worse over the last few days. Also had tinnitus in the ear for years. I'm worried about this pressure, the pain on the left side of my neck. I take ibuprofen and paracetamol tablets today, which didn't seem to help. All right, Peter, that's for you. Anything?
Okay. Well, first of all, number one, when you're losing your hearing in your ear, you worry about the conductive hearing loss, the ossicles, the hearing muscles, the hammer anvil stirrup, so to speak. The eardrum vibrates from a sound wave coming in. It's transmitted through the ossicles to the inner ear, and that's how you hear stuff. Okay, well, if you've got fluid in the middle ear due to an infection, otitis media, that could cause hearing loss. Okay, and you also mentioned some pain in the neck. Then you worry about the fluid extending posteriorly down into the mastoid. You could have a mastoiditis. It's rare, but you could have a mastoiditis. So what do? You can just push on the little bone behind the ear, and if that's tender, that would suggest you got a mastoiditis. What doctors are the main ones that take care of that? The ear, nose, and throat doctors, okay? So what they'll typically do is they'll look in your ear with the scope, and if they see fluid behind it, they'll call it an effusion. They'll put you on an oral antibiotic. If you're more sick and you're real tender, it's a mastoiditis, or there's a breakout whereby it's broken out of the bone and you've got an abscess within your subcutaneous soft tissues there. It's called a Bezold abscess. Then they might, admit you, put you on IV antibiotics. They might even recommend surgery, a mastoidectomy or something. But that's kind of where that's going. When you start talking about tinnitus, now you're talking down a bit of a different path, and you bring to mind potential vascular problems. You can get a tinnitus from an infection, but you can also get tinnitus from other causes, from vascular causes and all that. But I think it all begins with seeing an ear, nose, and throat doctor. Let them look in your ear and decide what to do from there. And if they're worried about tinnitus and they don't think it's an infection, an otomastoiditis situation, they'll probably get a CT scan of the neck, and they're going to be looking for all these vascular causes of tinnitus. And there's a whole bunch of vascular causes, internal carotid artery stenosis. You could have a diverticulum of the sigmoid sinus extending into the bone, and that can cause tinnitus. You can have normal variants, a high riding jugular bulb causing tinnitus. So those are kind of rare ENT things to look into. You can also try minimizing your dietary salt. You could have something called Meniere's disease, or Meniere's disease, how you pronounce it. And minimizing dietary salt sometimes resolves that.
Okay, great. So I like to eat green salads, kale, spinach, lettuce, etc. I've seen some studies saying adding fat, could be olive oil, etc., increases nutrition absorption of the fat-soluble vitamins. Would you recommend this approach?
I know, Jeff, you made a video along these lines. I think that
I made a couple of videos about it. This is called salad dressing science. This is paid for usually by, Procter and Gamble or Kraft or Hidden Valley Ranch, salad. And what they show, which is true, is that if you add some fat with your salad, you're going to absorb more of certain nutrients faster. That's the part they usually leave out, the faster part. But you are going to absorb those nutrients faster. But then there have been other studies that have been done where they take a longer period of time when they're looking at it, and you're going to still absorb those same nutrients. It's just going to take longer without the dressing. If you like salad dressings, if you like to add fat, you can do it and speed up the absorption of some nutrients, but you're still going to absorb those nutrients. The tests that are not paid for by the salad dressing companies show. So it's kind of a gimmick. It's like, buy my salad dressing because you're going to get more nutrients from it, but it's not really true.
Yeah, I actually think there's a bit of a movement to try to push people away from low-fat, low-protein vegan diet towards more of a moderate-fat, moderate-protein vegan diet, which in my opinion there's no evidence that that's anywhere near as healthy as a low-fat vegan diet. I think to me, it reminds me of the difference between the Esselstyn diet, which has fantastic, incredible results for prevention of coronary artery disease and reversal of coronary artery disease, versus a so-called optimized Mediterranean diet in the Lyon study. Okay, Esselstyn's diet was like 30 times better. And what I see is people are being inched towards this sort of moderate fat level vegan diet, which I call the vegan Mediterranean diet. And that's, where they say, have some olive oil, have some nuts, have some seeds, have some more soy. I don't think that's a good direction to go in, just so you know.
Right. Well, the Predimed was paid for in part by the nut industry and the oil industry. So there's a little bit of bias involved there. But let's see. It says, question, you talk about atherosclerosis being essentially blood clots. What difference do you make between plaque and blood clots? Thank you.
Okay, well, what I'm getting at is atherosclerosis is a blood clot. Okay, an atherosclerotic plaque, when it's acute, blood has clotted. And the reason I tell you that is I had a change in my thinking. When I was a young guy, I was an imaging guided surgeon at Harvard, interventional radiologist, doing a lot of lower extremity balloon angioplasty, placement of stents in the iliac arteries, thrombolysis of occluded arteries to dissolve the blood clots, things like that. I had friends that were cardiologists, vascular surgeons, cardiothoracic surgeons, and we would talk about blood vessels all the time. And we considered ourselves as the experts on blood vessels and atherosclerosis. But the more I studied atherosclerosis, I suddenly had a different change. I began to think of all of us as plumbers. We are simply trying to bypass a blockage. Can we open it up with a stent, dissolve a clot inside there? Can we bypass it with a surgical graft? But the people who understood atherosclerosis the best were the pathologists. They look at it under a microscope and they go, you know what? It's a blood clot. And then over time, the immune system comes in there and it tries to clear away the blood clot. And it starts laying down fibrotic tissue, collagen, and it eventually will often calcify. So initially, it's just a blood clot. But over time, you call it a so-called atherosclerotic plaque as it develops these other features. And another name for that really is organizing hematoma. Sort of the two best atherosclerosis researchers in the world. You can watch their videos. Look up Gregory Sloop, MD. He's the pioneer of the atherothrombosis theory. He's the guy who wrote the book about hematopathology. It's a magnificent book. He's another guy who deserves a Nobel Prize, and he'll never get involved in the text and put in the textbooks. Atherothrombosis theory, Gregory Sloop. The other guy who did fantastic work is William Roberts. You can watch his videos on YouTube, both of them. And he has an incredible paper. The best paper ever written on coronary artery disease. Is like over 2,000 autopsy patients who died of myocardial infarction. And the conclusion he came to is it's always diffuse. All the stuff about single vessel disease is nonsense. Well, the patient has only a problem in one of the coronary arteries and we just put a stent in it, we fix the problem, or we just bypass that one problem. No, he said it's always diffuse of similar severity and it's everywhere. So the only way you're going to treat a disease that's everywhere is it has to be treated with either a diet or a pill. And the diet works a lot better than the pills. So low-fat vegan diet, Esselstyn diet, that cures coronary artery disease versus the pills, statins, you run into other problems. You increase your risk of diabetes, you increase your risk of cognitive decline, you increase your risk of rhabdomyolysis, of malaise, of weakness, fatigue. Low-fat vegan is better.
Okay, so question to Dr. Rogers. Let me open this up. I'm a bit concerned about your choice to eat only one meal a day. Dr. Walter Longo at USC Aging expert and so on. Studies of long-living people, almost none of them skip breakfast. He once stated he worries about the gallbladder going too long without food on a daily basis with regards to forming stones. Perhaps Dr. Longo would make an exception for you because you eat your Spartan vegan diet. Wonder what you think of his research. And regarding my own concerns about your health. Peter,
I
you
think
gonna
we
be
kind of
okay?
already talked about that before. I already talked about the OMAD diet and about how breakfast being totally overrated.
Right. Dr. Nathan Byron, expert nitric oxide production, says that cholesterol does not cause heart disease, and that if we get cholesterol below 200, we can't make testosterone, estrogen, and vitamin D.
I've never heard him say that, and I've seen a bunch of his lectures, so I'm not so sure he really said that. Maybe he did, but I've never heard him say that. And I know he's friends with, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and, Esselstyn is a world-class expert on atherosclerosis, so I kind of doubt that. Everybody knows that cholesterol is a major risk factor for coronary artery disease. As a matter of fact, it's like the most important risk factor. And it's because LDL cholesterol in particular overcomes the zeta potential of the red blood cells, meaning that the red blood cells have a negative charge, so they repel each other. You don't want them to clot. But LDL cholesterol has a positive charge, big enough size that can hold them together, produce blood sludge, rouleau formation. It's also called stack of coins in French. Cholesterol is a major risk factor. There's mountains of data going back to show that elevated blood cholesterol is a major risk factor for coronary artery disease and for myocardial infarction. That's well known. That's really not debatable, disputable.
Okay, Doke, let's take a look at the next one here. My question is, seed oils I know are bad for a person, but is it 100% pure, cold, pressed, black cumin seed oil also bad for a person? Yes.
All oils are bad for blood flow.
Can kidney cells regenerate and function better under good conditions, plant-based diet like liver cells, or is loss of kidney function permanent?
Okay, well, liver cells can regenerate. Unfortunately, kidney cells cannot. And that's one of the reasons why you want to try to protect them as best you can, especially if you've checked your glomerular filtration rate and it's below 60. If it's below 60, you should be worried about that and try to really optimize things, because you develop a momentum with kidney failure. The worse it gets, the more it starts turning into a vicious cycle and progressing rapidly. And the reason for that is I talked about intraglomerular hypertension. The glomerulus is the filtration unit of the kidney. So let's say you've destroyed one kidney. You only got one kidney left. Like some people donate a kidney for transplant to someone else. Now this kidney has to do twice as much work, meaning that it has to increase its filtration pressures. And so it's constantly exposed to high filtration pressures because it has to do twice as much work as it did when there were two kidneys present. And over time, those high pressures destroy the glomeruli and accelerate the rate of kidney failure. And the worse the failure gets, the more the remaining residual glomeruli have to filter, and the higher the pressure inside of them, so the more rapidly they fail. So the point of it all is that you want to start getting your act together, the sooner the better, so you don't end up to the point where the vicious cycles become irreversible and you just fall into end-stage renal failure and need dialysis.
Very good. So here's one I have a question about longevity. Does Dr. Rogers believe in an afterlife with Jesus? He espouses Catholicism, derides a scientific basis of evolution. Does he believe human beings just showed up on the planet one day? Does he believe in metaphysical entities having agency towards creating miracles or something?
I'll tell you, there's a guy by the name of Harold Koenig, and he did research on the effect of religion on health. And what he found out is that people who follow any of the major religions, they're all much healthier. And it could be for multiple reasons. It lowers your stress level. The religions all, indicate some sense of purpose in life, and that helps a person lower their stress level. So I think religion is very helpful for health. The people who are religious, they're just healthier. And I've also seen people go atheist, and then they become alcoholics, they become drug addicts, they drop out of school, they commit suicide. If you think life is meaningless, that doesn't motivate you very much. If you think, on the other hand, life is this wonderful, special thing, and you have a relationship with God, and that you have a purpose in life, and you're going to try to fulfill your purpose, your destiny, that energizes you. That's a good thing.
All right. Dr. Rogers, I noticed you had glasses on in many of your past videos. You no longer wear glasses. Will you share why?
Some of my old videos, I was standing up and the camera was far away from me, and I was pointing and looking at the cameraman. So I wear glasses like when I'm driving. I don't wear glasses like when I'm reading or when I'm looking at a computer. So that's the reason.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you one thing interesting. I have one thing interesting for you. I was in my 30s and I went to the eye doctor, and he told me, Pete, you got a little bit of a cataract in both of your eyes. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. I'm only 30. I'm only like mid 30s. And so I'm like, okay, well, I got to be aware of that. And by the way, I was working as an imaging guided surgeon using fluoroscopy for a lot of procedures. So I was getting some radiation exposure from that. And then I found out that contact lenses were often stored in a solution of something called thimerosal, which has mercury in it. And I sometimes had worn contact lenses in those days before that. So I'm like, well, gee, I don't want to do that. I later learned that, dairy, just because you can split lactose in your gut, split it into galactose and glucose, that doesn't mean you can metabolize the galactose. And the galactose sugars damages little round things like the eyeballs, the gonads, and the ovaries. And that can also predispose you to cataract. But anyways, it was about that time that I had just become a vegetarian, lacto-vegetarian, and then I became 100% vegan. And what I'm trying to say is my eyesight, my prescription, it hasn't changed since I was in my mid-30s. I'm 61 years old. So I think that reversed the problem. And I can also tell you, I was scared of cataracts. What I've learned now from reading my vision's the same. For all these years, gosh, that's been we're talking about 28 years. It hasn't changed. So anyways, what am I getting at is that prevented the cataracts from progressing. I quit the dairy and I became a vegan, low-fat vegan. Versus when I look at demented brains, and I look at many thousands of them, almost the vast majority of demented brains, they've had cataract surgery on at least one side. Their brain's atrophic and shrunken, and they usually have poor dentition. They're missing several, if not all, their teeth. All those things go together. And bad teeth, poor dentition goes with leaky gums. Leaky gums goes with leaky gut. And then lack of cataracts goes with, like I just said, eating an animal food diet. And all the major eye diseases are atherosclerosis related. They're all vascular related. My mnemonic for them is CDOG: cataract, age-related macular degeneration, diabetes, hypertension, glaucoma. Okay, glaucoma is related to hypertension. So by avoiding the high-fat, high-sodium animal food, processed food diets, you avoid tons of problems. You don't even realize it, and that's why it's a smart thing to do.
All right. What are your thoughts on taking melatonin, especially for seniors who have trouble sleeping a decent amount of time at night?
Well, anytime you start taking a drug, you have a risk to become dependent on it. And so I would try to avoid that if I could. You know what I mean? I would really look carefully at all my sleep habits, at all my dietary habits. Are you drinking any caffeine? Are you doing anything that's interfering with your sleep? And you could study the sleep experts. I'll tell you a guy who I think is pretty good. I think he's pretty knowledgeable. That Roger Seholt guy. It's like Seholt's like Seheult. The name of his YouTube channel is called MedCram because he's also like a pulmonologist, critical care specialist, and a sleep specialist, and he teaches people about ICU medicine. That's why I think they call it MedCram, like cramming for a medical test. But anyways, I mentioned him because he's got tons of lectures on complex, detailed aspects of sleep. But, simple sleep hygiene is just don't eat any caffeine, manage your stress, avoid a unnecessary stressful thing, exercise during the daytime because when you build up sleep drive, don't be overhydrated right before you go to bed or you're going to have to wake up the void. Avoid unnecessary stress. Religious people have less stress, so that's good. So make your room dark, wake up at the same time every day, try to go to bed earlier. All of those things will help. No alcohol, that increases sleep. Glutamate can cause stress too. All that extra processed food, MSG, MFG, manufactured free glutamate, monosodium glutamate. It's a stimulant. Those are excitotoxins on your brain. Aspartame can do the same thing. So I would avoid all that stuff.
Okie doke. So can you talk about the white potato? Dr. Greger made again a video bashing white potatoes.
I'm laughing because there was this whole back and forth potato thing between Dr. McDougall and Dr. Greger. Dr. McDougall, maybe he's biased because he's part Irish, but he was very pro potatoes, and he had some excellent lectures called the Potato Mastermind Lectures. And Dr. Greger was not so enthusiastic about potatoes, but let me just tell you, if I had to pick between Dr. McDougall's knowledge or Dr. Greger's a very bright guy. He's a very articulate guy. He's a very knowledgeable guy. He's clever. He's funny. All that is true. But McDougall knows more than he does about nutrition.
Yeah, well, McDougall actually works clinically, or he did all his life. So Greger reads books, which is also great. But okay, let's see. Here's House of Fruits again. Main driver of atherosclerosis, cholesterol or animal protein?
Well, they're both major causes of it. And, cholesterol only comes from animals. You don't get cholesterol from plants. So Animal protein itself, though, T. Colin Campbell would write about this. Animal protein increases your blood cholesterol levels.
Here's somebody talking about the amount of ALA omega-3 contained in 1 to 2 tablespoons of ground flax seeds when not consumed with omega-6 in order to maintain a good omega-6 omega-3 ratio sufficient to obtain via conversion of ALA the recommended amount.
I'll tell you why I'm laughing. It's because everybody's dying of hypertension, diabetes, and coronary artery disease and cerebral vascular disease and becoming demented, plus all these toxins, okay? That's where your time should be spent. How can I avoid all this stuff? But instead, I say, all these people, they remind me like of a moth that can't help flying into the bug zapper. Everybody wants more of this magic fat. There is no magic fat. Forget about it, okay? You eat the low-fat plant foods, you get plenty of omega-3s. Dr. McDougall's written about that extensively. He said if you eat the low-fat plant-based diet, you will get all the omega-3s you ever need in every phase of your life, including childhood, including pregnancy, including old age, including every phase of your life. So
and you won't get the excessive. And that's where the problem comes, is when you're getting too much. And if people weren't making money trying to sell omega-3 fats to vegans and others, there wouldn't be any discussion. No one would even be thinking about this. My daughter's been diagnosed with eczema nodosum, I don't know, which is very painful. Could you give information about how she might have gotten this condition? Let us know. In fact, inflammatory disease, and autoimmune disease. Is Dr. Brooke Goldner's protocol for autoimmune disease the best course of treatment or something else? We can't find much about it.
Yeah, it's a rare disease. You can look it up on the internet, and you know, a lot of times it gets better on its own. Sometimes it can linger around for months, even a year, but it's usually a temporary thing. And as far as any autoimmune mechanism, it might be autoimmune. It can be associated with medication. It could be a medication side effect. It could be an infection side effect too. Sometimes you get a skin rash manifestation of infection. So you could check for an infection. You could check a chest x-ray for like tuberculosis or something, but it's probably not that. You could check a white blood cell count, see if the WBCs are elevated as an indicator of infection. You could do all that. If you think, you know, it could be an autoimmune mechanism, you can do all the stuff to avoid leaky gut like we've been talking about. Eat your fiber, avoid your vegetable oils and all that other stuff. I've talked about that extensively before. Brooke Goldner's approach is a little different, you know. So basically, McDougall's approach is prevent leaky gut and eat the healthy, low-fat vegan diet. And in so doing, you'll fix your immune system and your autoimmune diseases will probably go away. And I think that's excellent advice. Brooke Goldner's approach is different. Brooke Goldner's is sort of like saying, after you've tried everything else and you've tried like McDougall's elimination diet, you know, because maybe it could be a gluten problem from plant foods, you know, some breads, rye, barley, and all that stuff. It could be. There's a whole elimination diet for autoimmune disease. You could try that as well. You could try McDougall's eat sweet potatoes only for 4 months and see what happens with that. Okay, but let's say it's all failed. Where Brooke Goldner is coming from is she recommends this really high omega-3 type diet. And in a sense, what I think is going on is that's suppressing the immune system. Omega-3s have an anti-immune system, immunosuppressant effect. And, you know, she claims that she's gotten good results for an autoimmune disease. I would say it would be reasonable to try that before I would take the drugs. Because if you don't go down the Brooke Goldner path, then you're headed down the rheumatologist path, and they give these drugs for treatment of autoimmune disease that are very powerful to suppress immune function, like methotrexate and stuff. Well, guess what? Those are like chemotherapy. You know, chemotherapy drugs for treating cancer. So those are the steps. Number 1, get as healthy as possible. Try to fix your leaky gut. Number 2, elimination diet. Number 3, the sweet potato. Try a McDougall. And if it still don't work, then you can try the Brooke Goldner. And it still don't work, maybe you got to go to the rheumatologist. And by the time you try to figure all that out and tried all those things, you'll probably be better anyways. But
all right.
And also check for medication side effects. That would be the big one right in the beginning.
72-year-old male, blood pressure 100, 110 over 65, 73, total cholesterol 126, LDL 76, PSA 1, eat vegan 25 years, last couple of years no fat, last 6 months or so been up frequently at night to urinate, saw my urologist prescribed daily doses of Cialis, passed on it and tried powdered cranberries. After 6 or 7 weeks of cranberries, I've reduced my nocturnal bathroom breaks to 1 per night. My question is there something I can do to reverse the problem, get off the cranberries? If not, is there some way I can maintain where I am? As an aside, there's no way to reduce my LDL to 50. Okay.
Okay, well, at first I heard this thing, and I'm like, almost like this guy's showing off, this perfect blood pressure, these wonderful numbers. Okay, they're pretty good. Low PSA. Okay, so, you can drink less fluid at night and you'd be less prone to void. If you're 72 years old and you're only waking up once to void at night, you're like king of the hill. That's fantastic. Okay, that's great. Eat dinner a little earlier in the evening with less fluid. In that setting, you could make an argument for somebody like that. Maybe it would be better to eat a brunch or a breakfast even in terms of fluid status, because the fluid waking up at night is bothering you. But I'm not too worried about it. I thought Cialis was a little bit funny because it's a double drug. It's used on the one hand to treat benign prostatic hypertrophy, which makes a person wake up because big prostate's pushing on the bladder. But it's also an erectile dysfunction treatment drug. So it increases blood flow to the Johnson. And so if you have an increased blood flow to the Johnson, that might distract you at night, but there's ways to handle that. We're not going to go into it. Yeah, I know you might be tired of eating the cranberries. Maybe find a brand of cranberries you like better. I don't know for sure how much that's helping you either. But yeah, that's about the best I can tell you on that one.
Okay, what if vitamin D is still low, even when getting 20 minutes a day in the summer of sun? Many people say to supplement. Does it cause skin cancer, or is it caused by acidic body? I have a brown, itchy pigment rash on my back. It wasn't cancer. Okay. Anyhow. Thoughts?
Okay, well, first of all, I would recommend, Dr. McDougall has several lectures on vitamin D. I agree with him. He's studied that subject backwards and forward. And the bottom line is it's much, much better to get it from the sun than it is to take a supplement. He even said he wouldn't even give a supplement to anybody unless they were like institutionalized and they couldn't go outside and get some sun. You don't need, they exaggerate how high your vitamin D levels need to be. It's a way to sell more stuff. Again, the first step in selling a supplement or a drug is to convince the person they have a disease or a deficiency that requires the supplement or the drug. Okay, so they're going to tell you, oh, well, you're not at 50 or 70 or something, so you need this supplement. I think it's pretty exaggerated. I've never taken a vitamin D supplement. I never sought one out. I just go in the sun when it's warm time. It's a fat-soluble vitamin. The mnemonic is ADEK, A-D-E-K, ADEK. Sounds like addict. They're the fat-soluble vitamins, so it can carry over pretty well. It's going to be warm pretty soon. Just get your sun. Depending on where you live, when your summer season really starts, the sun comes out. But I would try to get your sun. And if you absolutely want to take a little bit of vitamin D, fine, take a little bit. But I'd be careful about taking large amounts, because then you start getting into increased calcium absorption. You start getting into concern about kidney stones and all that other stuff. So I'm not that enthusiastic about it. There's other benefits from getting the sun. So spend a little more time out in the sun when the time comes. And I just go out in the sun. I don't put any sunscreen on either. I think there's all kinds of toxic chemicals in sunscreen. It's sort of a subject for another day.
Agree with that. So let's just do a couple more here, and then I'm going to get going here. Are there any specific plant foods you recommend to strengthen teeth?
Well, the main thing with teeth is just don't eat the bad stuff. And when I say don't eat the bad stuff, is I recommend avoiding sweets and avoiding acidic foods. Like soda pops are almost the worst of both worlds, because soda pops are very sticky, so they stick to your teeth, and they're full of sugar, and they're also acidic. So they'll have a tendency to really accelerate the rate of cavities. The other thing is orange juice. Orange juice is off the charts acidic, and that can burn holes in your teeth. So I would avoid that, like all those processed foods. What else? You also got to take good care of your teeth. I think you should rinse your mouth with water after every meal. I like the water pick because it's, you just plug it in and it kind of pushes the water through the gaps between the teeth, so you clear that out. You can use those interdental brushes to clear out the stuff, because your saliva production drops at night. So you definitely want your teeth clean before you go to bed at night. You don't want a particle of food sticking in between your teeth, because the bacteria can feed on that. And then the bacteria pump acid out into their periphery, and that acid can burn holes in your teeth, burn through your enamel or your tooth protection. As far as brushing teeth, I don't like a toothpaste. There's so many toxic chemicals in toothpaste. I do sometimes use a non-fluoride version of Tom's of Maine, but I'll also brush my teeth sometimes just with a toothbrush and no toothpaste. Ruth Heidrichs, that's what she does. Ruth Heidrichs, the famous marathon triathlete lady who survived metastatic breast cancer over 40 years. Just brush with a toothbrush with no toothpaste. You don't want to brush directly over amalgams if you have any. That can stir up more mercury into your blood. You can floss. Get one of the simple flosses, unwaxed, nothing fancy on it. A lot of the fancy ones that say, you know, no stick floss, they got Teflon on them, you know, which is that fluoridated Teflon-like material, metal that's bad. You don't want that. You can absorb some of that in your body. You don't want that. The other thing to watch out for is I think a lot of people are taking medications that have anticholinergic side effects, which dry up your saliva. And those people get a lot of cavities because your saliva is what protects you. It's got enzymes to prevent the bacteria from chewing through your teeth.
Here's somebody talking about getting terrible palpitations when I take B12, cutting it in half. Does B12, can it cause palpitations?
I've never heard of it causing palpitations. Maybe it's, again, the additive. I would try changing to a different brand of B12, seeing what your B12 level is, figuring out how much you need to take. Because actually, the reason I smiled is a deficiency of B12 is associated with palpitations.
Okay, so someone asking, what can we do to manage or stop high blood pressure? Talked about that.
Oh, yeah, that's what I think is funny. The reason I think it's funny is because if you open up any of the medical books, even the Harvard cardiovascular textbook of pathophysiology, the recent edition, they're going to tell you most hypertension's unknown, 90-95%. So you might as well just take our pill, try to slow it down a little. And that's absolute nonsense because, like I said, plant-based, low-fat plant-based populations that don't add salt to their food, they don't have any hypertension, like essentially zero. Next to zero. Look at some rare tumor, pheochromocytoma. I've seen 2 in 30 years. Okay, that can cause hypertension. It's a joke. Low-fat plant. That's what you want to do.
That's the answer. I think that is going to be it for today, Peter. There's still plenty to get done here on a Saturday, but thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights. It's always great to have you on. We definitely need to do this again. It's very popular. We're getting, you know, way more questions than we can even answer, which means we'll do it. We'll do it some more. And thank you to everyone for watching today. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to give it a like, subscribe. Don't miss the next one. Subscribe to my Substack to get more, you know, notifications. And thanks for all your great questions. We'll see you on the next video. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks.